Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes 2 study session items. Seeing there are no action items or concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. The study session will be televised on Channel 8 and through live video streaming on Broomfield's website. Our first item this evening is a request for direction regarding reverse setbacks from producing and shut-in oil and gas facilities. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council and Community. Anna Burton, Director of Planning, will introduce this item and walk us through it. Ms. Burton.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. So City Council has held a few study sessions regarding reverse setbacks for oil and gas operations throughout 2021. Council approved Ordinance 2156 regarding reverse setbacks from pre-production facilities in 2021, and then later approved Ordinance 2164 regarding reverse setbacks from plugged and abandoned wells later in the fall. These ordinances establish setbacks to residential uses from pre-production facilities of 2,000 feet and 250-foot reverse setbacks to residential facilities from plugged and abandoned wells. Ordinance 2164 further allows for a reduced setback to 150 feet from the well to new residential units if there were 12 specific requirements met by the applicant, home builder, or the developer. And these included things like impervious membranes beneath the home surface and providing a gas detection system and alarm for the lowest occupied space. And those details were not included in the memorandum, but we'll include those 12 specific requirements as we move forward. Both ordinances also included a list of exceptions, which I will cover on a future slide as well. And if we could have the next slide, that would be great. Tonight's study session continues the prior discussions, the latest of which occurred in August of 2021 in regards to producing and shut-in wells. At the August 2021 study session, staff was directed to bring back the reverse setbacks from producing and shut-in wells for further discussion, and that's what we're here for this evening. Staff's memorandum from this and the prior study sessions included background information and information regarding potential impacts to development in Broomfield. Next slide, please. This map shows a range of setbacks: 200, 500, 1,320, and 2,000 foot reverse setbacks for producing and shut-in wells for the purpose of continuing the discussion this evening. It is possible that some of these wells shown may eventually be plugged and abandoned as operators move towards horizontal drilling operations. And there may be additional wells, there will be additional wells that are brought into production along the Northwest Parkway. This map is dated December 14th, 2021, and we'll continue to update this map as we continue to bring forward reverse setback discussions or ordinances. As can be seen in the map, the majority of our current producing and shut-in wells are located in northeastern Broomfield and also along the Northwest Parkway. Next slide, please. As I previously mentioned, the prior ordinances 2156 and 2164 regarding the setbacks from pre-production and the plugged and abandoned wells included 5 common exceptions, and those are on the screen. In addition to this list, reverse setbacks implemented by a future ordinance would also not be applicable to properties that have vested rights, as previously discussed. I'm not sure if Megan is able to join us. If we could have the next slide, please. This was included in our staff memorandum. There was a literature review as well as health data information. Next slide, please. Staff is requesting direction this evening regarding reverse setbacks. It's a little hard to read on the screen, but this list of specific questions was also included in staff's memorandum. If directed by the City Council, staff will bring forward an ordinance for consideration on first reading with potential changes to the reverse setbacks from oil and gas facilities that are producing or shut in, and a public hearing will be scheduled with a second reading of the ordinance. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. We'll start with council member questions or comments. So does any member of council that would like to start the discussion? Really? I go with council member Anderson.
That was really short and I was still getting my thoughts together, but I'll take a first, go around here. This is to Andy's question. Okay, so here's my thought that I put into this so far, and I would love to hear what others have to say. For number one, with the setbacks from producing wells to shutting wells, I feel like there's actually two categories here that we have to look at that are substantially different. And one of them is these new large-scale hydraulically fractured horizontal wells. And that for that one, I would suggest that we continue to go with the 2,000 feet per residential setback. That doesn't prohibit other development from occurring closer. Stuff like, and I'm not sure if I agree with that, but you can set up commercial development, just something about 2,000 feet for the residential and open to, potentially limiting other development in that area. But these are large scale sites, and the biggest concern here is that once they're in production, they're not just in production forever. They will come back and do maintenance on a regular basis. We've already had separated maintenance on the Livingston site. There'll be well swabbing. And there's also that potential for future operations on those pads that, I'm not sure if they would ever refract those sites. So, until you can guarantee that no more operations are going to occur and until they're really destined to be plugged and abandoned, I would suggest that we maintain that 2,000 feet. On the other hand, there are the old vertical wells that are up in the northeast section of Broomfield, where there's so many of them. And those are different. I don't think we have the same data here to cover exactly what that distance needs to be. These are wells that, all of the wells up there, looking at the COGCC data, are either uneconomical, low producing, or stripper wells. And, really we just need to get these wells plugged and abandoned. And that's, the chances of that being done before development happens is actually pretty good. And for these ones, I would suggest that maybe staff takes a look at, I'm not sure who all puts out data. I've seen Earthworks recently where they take the OGI camera out when residents have concerns, or they document different sites. And they oftentimes find, which I don't think there's the studies that, these haven't been studied the way that they probably should have been, but they do see as equipment gets older, you end up with, they have tanks up there and, equipment as it gets older, pieces fail, equipment rusts, so there's that potential for emissions. So I think we need to take a closer look at it, potentially keep the 2,000 feet, and hopefully work towards getting those plugged and abandoned. So that's question one. Question two, the exemptions from, okay, yeah, I would say we just maintain all these as a yes, understanding that for those that, there's so many residents already living close to these, oil and gas wells, that we just we need to do our due diligence on monitoring, keeping inspections going, do everything we can to protect the residents already close by, but we do have to keep those exemptions. Number three is, this council wants to consider changes to the priority or the notices. I would say yes, keep the notices, at least whatever the setback is decided. So I would say A, yes, 2,000 feet for notice. Definitely B, for leases, it matters for them as well. And C, I would go with 1 to put the requirement on the seller, and I look to staff for more guidance on exactly how that works, but something to definitely help individuals understand what exactly they're purchasing here. And that is almost like 5 minutes, so that covers all of them, so thank you.
Did you want someone to address that question? Did you have a question? No? No. Well, then, never mind. Thank you. Just to clarify, am I tracking responses or are y'all? You got that covered. Thank you. Okay, next is Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do have Wi-Fi now. Thank you. I don't know what happened, but we're all up and going now. I had some notes earlier. I might have to go back to them later. I think what I'm going to do is probably talk twice tonight, if you don't mind. The first round is just going to be sort of having an overarching view as to what our setbacks look like as far as 2,000 foot setbacks for pre-producing, we've had a lot of issues with, known issues with, sort of pre-production, right? We've had issues with drilling, with hydraulic fracturing. And probably a few of you saw it in my email today where I wrote to CMO crew and Dr. Weissner. There she is. And just sort of wanted to just sort of really realize that in the studies that she gave to us, there's a lot of them in there. And even on the last one, that was the furthest, I guess, that was in the 2000 foot setbacks, producing wells were not even mentioned. So we have to be very, very diligent and very understanding of the different types of development when we talk about oil and gas development. And oil and gas facilities, it's very different when you talk about producing wells versus pre-production. It's huge. And in fact, the studies don't even, if there is a study, I did send a study out though to just ask about our gas stations too. So our gas stations actually emit VTEX as well. And I would like to have a holistic view of that. I know California has, apparently, according to this article I sent you, California has 300 foot setbacks from their oil and gas, from their gas stations. So I would like to look at those particular studies of an area where we do have, higher cases of leukemia in those areas. I do know that we did have some leakage, obviously in our data as well. So we can look at those setbacks for that. And I just sort of have an issue with doing 2,000 foot for producing wells and shutter wells. And so I'm just going to sort of set the tone there just a little bit, just to make sure that we realize that there's a difference between the two. And the studies really analyzed a lot of the pre-producing aspects of it. Dr. Weissner, do you want to speak to those studies or maybe flesh out those and explain them a little bit more as far as like the differences in the oil and gas production?
Thank you, Councilmember Hinkle. So a lot of the studies did sort of a meta-analysis of what other jurisdictions are doing in regards to setbacks. None of them talked about reverse setbacks, just to make that clear. I think that's a little bit more unique, but I think nonetheless, it's still important to see what setback distances are. And so the 5 studies that I reviewed, they didn't really parse out all the different phases of development. Now we do see emissions that are higher in a lot of studies, especially during drilling. So a lot of the studies though, they didn't go into detail about the various phases and the different setback numbers for those phases. And I think it's one of 2 things. A, there aren't that many different setback numbers for various phases. And B, there's just limitations to the literature. I only found 5 studies that were really relevant that I wanted to bring forward. And a lot of the studies did mention that setbacks are political compromises, which I thought, oh, well, I think we're all very aware of that. But, and they highlighted that they would like to see more emissions data used in setting some setback distances. That's what scientists brought forward anyway. So I hope that sort of summarizes and helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And I have another question for you. When we talk about benzene, we talk about benzene guidelines for a certain period of time. What are the repercussions of going over those guidelines versus a standard again? I think we have some new council members up here that might not understand that, hey, yes, we do have emissions, and yes, I'm glad we're actually testing our air. That's very important. But what can we do about it? What stands up in court? And maybe you can answer that over there with the law degree. But what can we do with guidelines, or what is there, as far as like some hard stops?
So I would have to let legal speak about the legalities of that. So CDPHE, they did a presentation on January 5th and talked a little bit about this. Health guideline values aren't enforceable, but for our new council members, the state of Colorado has a health guideline value of 9 parts per billion. So that's not to say you will experience a health impact at that level, but somewhere above there, depending on your individual sensitivity, confounding variables, other types of exposure that you may be around, you could experience impacts. So I think the hard part is it's just not enforceable. And that's where I think that the challenge is. with all of us in this room.
Thank you very much. As far as the legality of it, where do guidelines, can you just stop production or what does that look like?
And thank you, Councilmember Hinkle, for that question. No, you cannot automatically stop production. There is the ability for local governments to regulate various areas of air quality, but it's more complicated. And we have to look at, and I'm going to look at my screen because I want to repeat something that Elizabeth Kranos had told it. We have to look at the Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act. That allows local governments to enact their own emission control regulations, which can be more stringent than the state regulations, but then there's limitations on that. And so sort of the devil's in the details of how to do it. Broomfield can impose local regulations on criteria pollutants, ozone precursor emissions, and those may be stricter than AQCC. So this is an area we can, but there are some limitations here and there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I'll just kind of leave it at that for right now, and then I'll circle back on answering some of these questions. I am just hesitant to change our current status right now. I'm fine with making sure that everyone has sort of a notice and being, aware of oil and gas wells in the area. I've had people come to me and say, hey, I just bought a home and no one told me about this. And so I do have to explain it to them. So I do think it is important to at least have that notice. But again, I'll circle back in the details. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm learning the timer still. Okay. Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that's kind of getting this differentiation between pre-production wells and production wells. So right now, when we look at our map, we have some well paths that are in pre-production. We have some that are in production. So my first question is especially looking at that northeast part of Broomfield, we have a lot of wells that are in that production phase. Can those wells at some point be re-stimulated and essentially go back to that pre-production phase? I'm sorry, I was having a hard time. Can you repeat that? No, of course. So looking at those wells that are in production phase at this point, can they be re-stimulated and essentially be put back into that pre-production phase?
So primary data that we have on that incident that you're talking about right now does not indicate that we're seeing the same levels of emissions once they have been brought into production. Re-stimulation is a closed loop process. That being said, as we all know, this recent weekend event, that does not preclude events from happening. So it's kind of hard to do one or the other, but there is a delineation of, we certainly see more regular VOC emissions from pre-production activities versus when they're in production.
So when we see these the productions go from a producing well back to kind of a re-stimulated well, we're going to have refracking operations. We're going to have more noise, more light, more emissions coming off that path at that point.
So we haven't seen any refrac, and in conversations with the COGCC, they're not aware of any horizontal wells that have been refracted in this basin. That being said, if the economics are there, they'll refract. So, we don't know what things are going to look like 10 years, 20 years from now, right? The re-stimulation that's been done in Broomfield is a closed loop process, and it's a process called well swabbing. And it's not the same kind of thing as hydraulic fracturing.
And you had said with the horizontal wells, that's where we haven't seen. So have we seen the re-stimulation of vertical wells?
Refract.
Yeah, refract vertical wells. So
Yes.
So we do have that potential for those older vertical wells that are in the northeast part of Broomfield.
Certainly potential, yes.
Okay. Right now we have BMPs that would cover the extraction path, but for those vertical wells, we don't have any BMPs or anything that exists on those.
We don't, although we do have a robust leak detection repair program where we go around on a quarterly basis and inspect all of those legacy facilities on a make sure that there's no leaks.
In your conversations with the COGCC, did you ever look into kind of, are there municipalities that have stood up operator agreements to basically look at shutting wells or producing wells to prohibit them from moving back into a refrac simulation in terms of looking to develop the areas around that well?
As in codifying something like that.
Right.
We tried to do that.
I mean, just basically to say, you know, what's the certainty that exists there? And has anybody done it? Is this something?
Not that I'm aware, but I can check on that.
And thanks for the information about the specific wells and things like that. Looking at the other side, you know, in terms of the memo listed the 6 development projects that have kind of moved forward. And I was curious if we have kind of what the status of those and what the timeline looks for those development projects, those 6 that you had listed.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. And I neglected to introduce myself previously. Anna Burton, Planning Director and Co-Director for Community Development. Let me just bring that up so we're looking at the same. Maybe. There we go. So in the memorandum, as you mentioned, we have a list of development projects. The first of which was the Viavara Estates development. That's currently located near a well that's shut in currently. It is currently in development review process, but it has been on hold due to an unfortunate death in the family. It's been on hold for an extended period of time, and we don't have a time frame for when that will be brought forward. The Viavara Townhouse, that is currently under construction. So we include it only because of the potential for some of those units not to have already been built. And the exceptions, one of them is that has been used on prior ordinances, has been that if a PUD site development plan and final plat are in place, then they can go forward. So that project is currently in the process of development. That also includes the Northwest Apartments, which is an affordable housing apartment project. That has not broken ground yet. 257 land is on the east side of I-25. Probably some of the closest to the producing wells on the east side of I-25. We do not have a time frame for that either. We would expect there is some interest in the property, so we could see new concept proposals this year, but it's probably a few years off from actual development occurring. Let's see, other east of I-25, again, probably a little bit further in the future, primarily driven by the availability of utilities in that area. Baseline development is currently, as you know, in different phases of construction. That property also has vested rights. And then the northeast corner of 160th and Huron Street, there's 5 rural properties there. They're kind of a donut hole really in the middle of the baseline development. We've seen significant interest in the properties, but we don't have a time frame for their development either.
And so just circling back to that one, that was the east of I-25, no development name without the utilities. What's the timeline look for getting utilities up there?
We have in our 5-year plan a lift station for the east side of I-25, and that's really necessary. Another lift station is actually needed in addition to that 5-year lift station in order to meet the area on the kind of the north quadrant of Brimfield, have water and utility services. So I'm thinking probably the 5 to 15 year time frame would be the first time we'd see significant redevelopment in the area. We may be able to see some things like the school that was interested and able to work out an agreement with other water service providers for an interim condition, but not significant development until that at least 5 to 15 year horizon.
Okay, great, I appreciate the information. Mayor, that's all the questions I have this time.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Lim.
Yes, this goes to Councilmember Anderson's point, and I guess it's directed at staff too. Are all the wells in the northeast area of Broomfield low producing? And would
could this be a possible incentive then in setting the reverse setback for operators and developers to work together to get those wells P&A?
I think I could take that one, Councilmember Lim. So low producing doesn't have a definition. I think the COGCC is kind of working on that right now, but it's a bit of a sticky question. If it was my judgment, I would say yes. Those are kind of marginal wells in the northeast of Broomfield. And to your question about creating an incentive, I don't know. I think we need to think about that a little bit, how that might be crafted, but there might be a possibility there.
I guess that's assuming that right now we're looking at 250 feet from the P&A, that's in the regulation.
Yeah.
And then assuming that we would set this production reverse setback at some higher level.
Councilmember, kind of to address your question, there is a separation between the surface developer often and the owner. But we have seen where previous developers have reached out to mineral owners, the operators of the well, to try to negotiate the quicker plugging and abandonment of a well for usually a monetary compensation for that operator to expedite that. But we have seen that previously on the west side of I-25.
Okay.
And Councilmember Lim, if I could jump in, we're also monitoring the financial assurances rulemaking and are participating in that in the COGCC to see what incentive that will provide irrespective of development for operators to plug their wells. And Mike Foote, our outside counsel on oil and gas, has been looking at potentially a local financial assurances that would do something similar to incentivize the operator to go ahead and plug that, even if there isn't a developer involved. But when there are a developer involved, it helps those negotiations at the end.
Thank you. And in August, during separator maintenance at Livingston, we had our own benzene spikes. Is that true, staff? And that's during production.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And was there anything that was known to be, was there anything that was obvious that could have been done differently in the operator's process that would have avoided those?
Well, we made some suggestions, and after we saw those air quality events, the separator maintenance actually coincidentally stopped because of some supply chain issues. So they haven't had a chance to implement those process changes. But yeah, certainly it was a large enough event that it got our attention, and we wanted to kind of do a deep dive.
Okay, so that was during production.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Valdez referred to the separator incident separator valve malfunction that just occurred on Northwest AB, wherever it was, that combination, on last Friday. So is the same process taking place in a production phase? And do we have the same potential for large black smoke frightening residents, numerous of whom called 911 and so forth?
So the COGCC doesn't actually distinguish the difference between flowback or production. You know, it is mechanically a little bit different, but as soon as they report 1 barrel of production, then they consider it, you know, in production. So even though we're calling Northwest in flowback, it could be, the case could be made that it is already in production. And this kind of thing could happen theoretically, again, on other wells that are in production.
Okay, thank you. I think those are my questions for now.
Right, thank you. Any other council member questions? Comments? Councilmember Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'll be brief. I think on this item, I actually think we're a little bit premature, bringing this up in a study session, before we've seen, a longer, discussion on financial assurances. I think when we're looking at construction 5 to 15 years in the future, it would be my preference that all of those older, low-producing wells, would be properly plugged and abandoned by then and not by a developer, way in the future. So I think we're really premature, especially when it comes to that older, low producing equipment in the northeast corner of Burnfield and the southwest corner. So my preference would actually be to have a discussion on those wells at a later date after we figured out if there is a way we have stronger local financial assurances and you come up with a better solution that might get these things resolved sooner. For the 4 pads that are going into production over the next year and a half or are in production, I think a higher distance I could support. I definitely support the increased notice under item 3. I mean, for all of these wells, but I think for those 4 pads, we could have a discussion about increasing that setback, but we're not really talking about that much developable land. So again, I think we're a little premature in these discussions at this time. I think there's probably better solutions than coming out and requiring a 2,000-foot setback and forcing developers 10 years in the future to address these things. So I'm hesitant to move forward immediately until we have those other discussions. So that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Jezerski.
Thank you. I do have a question, and I do agree with a lot of what was just mentioned by Councilmember Lindsted. I have a question regarding the concerns I was hearing. It sounds like that there's maybe not a lot of risk with these, especially these older producing wells, but there seems to be some concern that I was hearing from my colleagues regarding the possibility of re-stimulating or refracking these wells. If that ever did occur on these older wells, would it be subject to our other setbacks that we've already approved that are larger for not producing wells, but I guess for wells that are in that fracking stage? And if not, can we revise it to make it that it is? I guess my thought process was that if that is truly a more dangerous stage of the process, and we have a lower setback requirement because we think they're producing well, doesn't need a higher setback. If there's a concern that it then goes back into that more dangerous phase, we also now we have homes that are close by. Would those homes be precluded from being built because they are now going into that stage and under our current regs, or if not, can we make it so that is the case?
Yeah, so all of those go ahead.
There is a point where you need to get a new permit. And when you re-enter a well, you're going to need a new permit and new regulations would apply. So it's not that an old operator and I would say even extraction on some of their wells would have to get some of their work permitted. Now on stimulation, and that we've had a discussion before about what stimulation and what falls into that, there is some gray area of what is too far that requires a permit. And that's something we would look to COGCC for. But a lot of this work that we're talking about on these wells that are not being utilized right now, low producing, nobody's doing, they're going to need a new permit to refract that well. Is that what you were asking?
Sort of. But also would want to know if they were to try to refract that well, would they have to comply with the 2,000-foot requirement that we have for pre-production wells?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the state's requirement as well.
Okay, so basically, if we have a well that's a low producing well that's in production, and we have a lower setback, whether it's 250 or 500 feet, whatever that is, and then homes go in there, And at some point, they wanted to refrac it. They wouldn't be prohibited from doing so because we have a 2,000-foot setback on pre-production.
Yeah, to go back in and refrac, yeah.
So they would be prohibited if there was a home that went in within that 2,000 feet.
Just looking at the team for, because we've been talking about this re-entry type of situation.
Does everybody agree? Yes. If that's being the case, I think it takes that concern off the table, it sounds like, from what I'm hearing. So then it just comes down to, in my mind, what is the actual risk during the production phase and what that risk is and what do we need to protect from. And then also going back to my overall philosophy, if someone wants to accept that risk and live closer, I'm not sure I really have much objection to that. I certainly have an objection to, again, to a well coming into someone who's already living in a home that's the nuisance coming to you, but if someone wants to live next to the nuisance, that's on them. I wouldn't do it, but if someone else wants to do that, I'm not gonna stop them.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Before we go second round, is there any other comments on the first round from council? I just have to tell you though, because everybody knows that new neighborhood, the Anthem Reserve was platted a long time ago, but now the homes are finishing and people are moving in. And since it was platted before our 1320 informed consent requirement, they weren't told about any of the oil and gas activity. And they did some research and they found a little bit of information, but yeah, that one slipped through the cracks. And I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, is that so many people weren't, myself included, you know, when I moved to Colorado, I never heard of anything called residential fracking. You know, this was something that happened out in the rural area. And so many of us just never thought this would happen here. And what we're trying to do, based on our experience with extraction for the last couple of years, is that we know that it's invasive, it's disruptive, it's stressful, and it's noisy, it smells, I mean, it's full of emissions, and it's an industrial operation, plain and simple. And that does not belong where people are living and playing in yards, and, you know, they need to be zoned properly. That's why we have zoning. We don't put industrial facilities next to homes. It's safety. So this is where this is all coming from, is that we care about our quality of life in Broomfield for everybody. And the experiment up in north part of Broomfield showed us that it doesn't belong near homes or parks or schools. So we're just trying to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's my soapbox. I'll go to Councilmember Hinckley.
Thank you, Mayor. I also echo what you just said, Mayor Castrata. This hasn't been a fun conversation. It's been a very expensive conversation and hurtful to a lot of our residents. And I want to reiterate that this isn't something that we, take lightly. I do think that we need to define a lot more. I am not okay with letting home builders always foot the bill before oil and gas is done and left behind. So I do think that we need to look at our financial assurances, and Mr. Foote, that would be amazing if we could find some way that we can do that to incentivize those who made the mess in the first place. Councilmember Jazierski took my question about refracking and they would need a full permit. I thought that was the case, but wasn't sure. And then I just wanted to note that we can regulate above ground. We can't regulate below ground. So I'm curious as to, can we regulate and define production locally then? I feel like we still need to define from here on forward, what does production then even look like? And if we can regulate that locally since it is above ground.
But Councilmember Hinkle, I think that gets back to the permitting process. We can negotiate an operator agreement, but the state issues and approved permits. So it would have to be something that would be negotiated.
It depends on what we're trying, yes, and it depends on what we're trying to apply. For our regulations and our setbacks, our definitions apply, would apply. So if we're trying to look at a well, I'm sorry, if we're looking at a well and trying to determine what setback applies, it's gonna be our definition of producing, our definition of, to decide if it's 2,000 feet. You know, we are watching to see what the COGCC does because we'd like it to be consistent. But for the purposes of this regulations, we could set that definition.
Okay. I would like to set that definition just in general, because we have also had different definitions of drilling as well. And if a well has been entered or not. So I would just like to see things more fleshed out before we even move forward with any sort of regulation on producing wells and shutting wells. Thank you.
Thank you. We have any council members around two? Councilmember Lynn.
In the area of refracking, if there were a permit required to be submitted to the COGCC, where does the authority lie in whether that permit is approved or not? And if it's in the COGCC, does the COGCC setback have variances?
It does have variances, but I think one of them is the local jurisdiction has to agree, which we wouldn't, right? And what was the first?
Okay, so no, that's fine. That combined the two together.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Do you want questions or comments? Okay, so I am still of the opinion that we need to question number one, that we need the 2,000-foot distant reverse setback distance. And my reasons are based on the lack of health studies for production. We need to apply the precautionary principle. There are many people on this council who have gone across the state talking about the precautionary principle and the fact that we don't have enough health studies to prove it. So when we have our own evidence that we have benzene spikes during production, we just had last Friday a very dangerous, potentially dangerous, separator valve malfunction, where the residents, based on their experience with the Marshall fire, were very concerned that excessive product that went to the ECD and caused the flare was going to cause sparks that were going to end up setting the open space on fire. When we have all of that evidence from our own experience of what could happen during the production phase, I think we need to apply that and use the precautionary principle in setting the reverse setback from producing and shut-in wells. Number two, those exemptions that we have used before, I agree with those. And the notices, yes, that should certainly be increased and made tighter to make sure that they're implemented. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lynn, did you go through all of the places where you need direction?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so we're gonna ask every council member to go through this list so that we can give staff direction and move forward with something. Who wants to go next? Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, so I already went through the list, so now I'm gonna go backwards. I have questions.
Okay.
Sorry. So I was trying to look back to see if we had, we have information coming from all directions. I'm not sure if everyone sitting up here has a good overview of what the financial assurance rulemaking includes. I don't know if Ms. Rogers or our special counsel, Mike Foot, one of you could give us an overview of the COGCC's financial assurances rulemaking as it stands, and if, I know it's not complete yet, like when do you expect that final ruling, and what could it do for us, and if not, what gap could we fill through local rulemaking? Because I think that might answer some of the questions regarding the development that's 5 to 10 years off in that area.
Sure. Mike, I know you've been involved in this. If you want to head to the podium, I'll give the deadline information because this is a proceeding that's going on right now. The hearing is actually going to start again on January 20th, and staff's presentations will be in the morning. On the 25th to the 28th and the 2nd to 3rd, there'll be party testimony, and then final deliberations by the COGCC will happen on the 7th. And then we expect the rules in the next couple of weeks. So then I'll turn it over to Mike if you want to talk about sort of what's been going on up to this point.
Right, thank you, members of council. So it's been a very long and winding road so far with this financial assurances rulemaking. It actually started with an informational docket earlier, what I should say in 2021. We're in 22 now, and it's probably going to end up being about a 12-month process. When it's all said and done, of course, the main issue really is how much financial assurance is our operators going to have to put on their new wells and also their additional wells. And that's really what's caused a lot of the sticky issues. There are, give or take, 50,000 existing wells at this point. So how much financial assurance are the operators going to have to put on those wells that already exist, as well as wells that get transferred from one operator to the other, and then of course new wells. There is really no consensus. The parties are very far apart as to what it should be. Generally speaking, the environmental groups and some community groups think that it should be a full cost bond on all, or at least all transferred wells. Full cost bond, meaning that again is an issue of dispute, but full cost bond could mean something between $85,000 to $95,000 per well, just depending on who's counting and which wells they're averaging out. Some groups think that it's much larger than that, but the COGCC did a study of 23 wells that were plugged, abandoned wells that were plugged in 2021, and found that the average was 92,000 for those wells. So again, that's not really something that's agreed upon by all groups. But the oil and gas industry groups are opposed to that concept. They claim, first of all, that it would be impossible for them to do that. But even so, that there's really not much of a problem with plugging and abandoning. In general, that's their argument. So here we are with this rulemaking that's coming up, and there's really no consensus on pretty much anything when it comes to what the additional financial assurances should be. Senate Bill 181 required the commission to look into various options, but it didn't mandate any of those options to occur. So it's looking into various options, like how would you do a sinking fund for operators if they were to continue to put money into bonding up to something like a full cost bond. They're looking into that, or at least they've explored that, but so far, none of the rule drafts that have been issued have that particular concept in it. The one exception is the current draft that's out there that's going through the comment now does have something that would approach a full cost bond for all transferred wells for certain operators. And so, like I said, there's really a lot of moving parts right now in this particular rulemaking. So if there's specific questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those. Hopefully I gave a good enough overview of what you're looking for.
Okay, so I think my other question, that's really helpful. I think to give us all an overview, and then you can stay there for a minute. Okay. If we were able to get something passed where they have to do this full cost of bonding, and one of the options that would be the operator to plug and abandon those wells if they truly are uneconomical. And do you know the time frame that would occur in if this did go through, or if we did something local similar to it? Like, could we get those wells then plugged and abandoned through that process, but uneconomical and no longer useful in the next 5 to 15 years?
Well, I suppose that would be the hope, right? Is that there's an incentive created for the operator just to plug it instead of having to pay a higher financial assurance. I mean, that would be I think the premise and the hope. I just, based on what I've seen with the different drafts that have gone about and the comments from the parties, I would not be too optimistic that that's going to happen, meaning a full cost bond for all wells, maybe not even the transfer wells. But in the case of what you're talking about with the Northeast Broomfield wells, if they're just still in the hands of a single operator and not transferred, even a full cost bond was imposed for transferred wells, that's still not going to apply to wells that aren't transferred, even if they're low producing or stripper wells. So that would be the concept to build upon for maybe a local ordinance that could maybe address that particular situation. I mean, if you make it where there is more of an incentive to actually plug the well than to have to pay an increased financial assurance, then perhaps that might achieve the policy objective that you're after.
Okay, thank you, that's very helpful. Okay, and then that's it for you, Mr. Cook. Thank you. And then I had one other question for, this is by for Andrew. Do we have a list of the vertical wells in Northeast Broomfield? Like, do those mostly have tanks, and do we know the condition, like how well they're being maintained? And would that, this goes back to that question about, you know, looking into some of the OGI work that's been done where they've shown some of the leaks, and is that what we're seeing in Wall County? Is that similar to Broomfield up in that area?
Yeah, so we do have a list, and these are the wells that we inspect on a quarterly basis. There are 4 wells that are candidates for orphan in that area, and one of these has an active remediation on it right now. No operator, and we observed a spill, a minor spill, some soil staining. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does help. I was just thinking that goes into that as we're going forward, if this is helpful to the process of determining what that setback would need to be if we want to try to get down to something much less than 2,000 feet and just say that these wells are safe. It's like, what does it really look like? What is the condition of these wells? And in fact, quarterly inspection is important. And then perhaps there's something to get below the 2,000 feet where they're required to put up air quality monitoring and do more inspecting or something to just say that residents will not be subjected to, I know we know this from our experience, emissions happen, things go wrong, and it's how quickly, I don't want people sitting in their homes, suffering from headaches and different things, reaching out to earthworks or some other organization to come and inspect the well, which we got our own program here in Broomfield where that's the first sign of trouble, we're playing it. So, and that's still in that fuzzy place of what can that setback really be, but that's more common than the question.
No, and if I could just add real quick, I think the cleanest solution here really is the bonding and then perhaps a local registration program like how Boulder County has. If they have to pay a yearly fee for these marginal wells, they might just say, well, instead of paying the fee again, we'll just plug and abandon. And then, soil gas testing has really been the only issue there, and it's intermittent.
Councilmember Anderson, if I may, Andrew, for the council members that are new, do a 5,000-foot overview of when we started the plugged and abandoned well inspection program.
Sure.
How many are on that list? How many have we checked? How many have shown to be an issue? How many are left to be checked? And we do it quarterly.
Yeah, so not quite quarterly. We stood up, I think our first in the state soil gas testing program for plugged and abandoned wells. And the concern there is not really emissions and health impacts. It's leaking methane, collecting in an enclosure like a basement, and then posing risk of explosion, right? So we have about 110 of these wells throughout Broomfield. We observe a few of them getting decommissioned every year, and we soil gas test those. First, we locate them, and we soil gas test those to make sure that there's no subsurface methane. Our progress so far is it's not as easy as just saying go to our consultants who are providing the service, because some of the locational data is outdated. So we need to go locate those wells, and then we do the soil gas testing. There's, like I said, about 110. We've soil gas tested half of them. We found a problem with one in Anthem. Turned out to be a real big issue, right in the middle of the development underneath the road. had road base on top of it, a lot of compounding factors. By the statistics, we may have one more, who knows, but in general, the data shows that 1.5% of plugged and abandoned wells may fail in like a 50 or 100-year time horizon. Is that the overview? Did I miss anything?
No, I appreciate that.
And that was all my questions. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to go through these questions myself. When we're looking at the setbacks, are we going from the well or are we going from the well pad? I mean, what would staff propose on this?
Thinking, we can double check. I thought we were doing it from the well. Do you remember, Anna? I can pull it up.
I think it might be from the well or any well equipment. But you're right, I have to look at the very detailed.
Councilmember Shaw, go on to your next question until we can clarify that one, please.
Okay, yeah, I think that there's a difference, right? There's a difference between, what that looks like. Is it a well or is it, there was talk about the wells in the northeast corner of Broomfield, they have much more equipment on site. When we're talking about a distance from that well, there's going to be a distance that is going to include some equipment and things like that are going to be there that are going to need to be taken care of. So we had talked about this with plugged and abandoned wells and looking at just the physical distances that are needed when we're looking at what it's going to take to refrac those maintenance activities, P&A those wells. And the number that we got at that point was 250 by 250 in order to take care of that well. And so when we're looking at that 250 feet setback from that well may not be enough to actually take care of what needs to be done on that well, regardless of the activity that's done. So that causes me a little concern that 250 foot setback may not be enough because if that's all that's included, we may end up, having some of this activity happening in somebody's backyard, fence removal and the disruption that goes on there. So, when I think about that, I think, if I was that homeowner, what would that distance be? What would I like that distance to be? If that well is 250 feet away and a maintenance activity or P&A work is going to happen in my yard or right next to my fence, do I feel okay with that? And I think that most people would say, no, I want that a little bit further away. That may be 50 feet, it may be 100 feet, it may be 250 feet. So I think that, there's, we can talk about some of the unknowns in terms of emissions and in terms of production activities, but just on that physical distance, I think that we have to consider of that what is that distance. So I think that, that 250 foot setback is not going to be enough when we talk about that physical distance that is going to be needed to take care of those wells that are still either producing or shutting well. And at some point, those are going to be P&A, and we need the physical distance to take care of those. So, I would say that 250 is just not enough. If I look at the sheet, the next one on there is 500 feet. Perhaps that's a little bit, too much, but I think that 500 feet, if I was given these options, that's going to be much more comfortable for a lot of those homeowners that are sitting next to that activity that's going to be happening in their yard. So I would say that on that number one, that 500 foot is much more comfortable than that 250 foot. I think that I agree with the ladies that sit next to me on 2 and 3. That those are great answers that they provided. So that's all I have at this point. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw. It's from an oil and gas facility as that's defined in our code, which does include not only the well, but then the supportive equipment around the well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? We need directions, James. Oh, great, Mayor Burton. Thank you.
I will go. For the first question, let me go back to something Councilmember Anderson said way in the beginning, and didn't really, I'm not sure what her direction was on that, but I think there can be a difference between the large scale sites that we've seen over the last couple of years and the individual producing wells that are scattered throughout our community. So I could be, and this is just my gut feeling, I could be talking to something larger in those large scale sites, those are just big industrial sites, as they were mentioned. Something larger than the current 250. I'm not sure how much larger, but definitely would make sense to me. I think it's a harder sell for me on the individual sites. The 500 feet that Councilmember Shep mentioned, that can make sense, but I would need to hear some arguments as to the reasons, health and safety reasons why we want to make it beyond 500 feet for those individual wells. And I do understand that any of these sites are industrial sites, but people do choose to live next to highways and trains and train tracks and gas stations and bars and restaurants and stuff like that. So, as long as there's no significant safety risks, I would be somewhat, I feel okay with the smaller 250 or 500 for the individual wells. And beyond that, I'm okay with all the yeses. Number 2 for the most part. And although I don't understand as much the 2E, and then yes notices for yes for number 3.
Mayor, for them, 2U is more the Wilcox area.
Okay.
A lot of those historical properties have wells right outside your kitchen door. They do want to split their lots and build, and what's the word, auxiliary units for families. So it was mainly with that Wilcox area,
Okay.
A1 rural.
Okay. I guess my thought is on those, I would, if we're going with the smaller amounts, I'd be more reluctant to give any additional exceptions to those. If we're going for larger numbers, then yes, I'd want to make sure that those were all exempted.
And then with number 3, you're
Yes, increase the notices. Yes. Yes, although 2, 3. I think the last one I was a no. 2, 3, C, double I. Yeah, I think I was a no. I don't want to put that onto the buyer. I think it should be on the seller.
okay. Thanks for the clarification.
That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Ward?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to just right off the bat just say yes for everything in 2, and yes for 3A, B, and C1. I do think it should be on the seller, not the buyer. With regard to the setbacks, I definitely think and agree more along the lines of what Councilmember Lim suggested with the 2,000 foot setbacks, just because we don't have all of that information necessarily right offhand, and I always like to err on the side of caution.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you. I'll do like Councilmember Ward and start with 2 and 3, but support 2, A through E. On 3, I also support the CI and the CII. I do believe it's important to have proper and excessive notice in something in this case. And I think we all know when we go through the house buying process, especially in a heated market like this, you don't have much time to meditate on your choices. And you can easily miss important things, or you end up even getting up inspectors just to seal the deal. So I do think proper notice. We're asked to approve all these housing deals at the stamp of approval. I think we're morally obligated to make sure we're offering home buyers the safest homes possible, and also make sure there's full transparency. And it shouldn't be a case where it's buyer beware. On the setbacks, I'm struggling to find the principle to fall back on. I think basically we want people to be safe. I'm struggling with the 2,000 foot because it doesn't seem to be supported fully by the research that we have to go to that full distance, but I understand the idea of precaution. 250, I believe, is the figure that we were told was sufficient to do any maintenance in the future. If I'm wrong on that, please correct me, but I believe that was the number they gave.
That's correct, Councilmember Cohen, and to Councilmember Schaaf's point, there was 2 points to that, and one was access. And the other one was comfort of the residents. So from an access perspective, the indications that we received was 250 foot was a sufficient amount to do do any of the additional work that needed to be done from an access perspective. We aren't speaking or giving guidance with regards to the level of comfort.
And real quick, back up one point, I wanted to answer Councilmember Jazuski's comment about people choosing to live next to trains and other oil wells or electric lines. I don't know if they choose, but they accept, because those are often the cheaper alternatives. So I think
I'm not so sure about that.
we'll agree to disagree on that point. But what I'm more interested in is what I believe Councilmember Liv broached earlier was the strategy of incentive. I think our basic underlying interest is to get these wells plugged. And so I'd be interested in a setback or a strategy in that using setbacks to get us to the point where as many of these wells are as plugged as possible, and then homes can be built.
Thank you. Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you everyone for listening to me now for the time. I apologize. A lot of this affects Ward 5. I want to be very clear about this. And I also want to be very clear that, there's still a lot that we need to define. So number 2, I have no problem, exempting the following from the ordinance. And if we're going to hit targets here on number 3, I don't mind a larger notice area. I would just like to know eventually what would be in that notice. If we end up on a smaller, radius than 2,000, and we're saying, hey, 2,000 is for pre-producing, but by the way, this is just a producing well, I would want to know why we would want that notice. So I don't mind it being the requirement being on the seller. I would like to look into a little bit more on how we cannot regulate the real estate broker's activities, but yet we're going to put it on the seller. I would like to see that a little bit more fleshed out if that's the way that we're going. I don't mind putting it on the seller, not the buyer. As far as number 1, I am going to reiterate as far as VTEX and the studies done on that. What we do know is that there are studies done with gas stations too. And so, and I understand the precautionary principle, I get it. And yes, I did travel the state to talk about that, but we also talked about pre-production. We talked about fracking, and we talked about drilling that was really detrimental. And we really have to dissect this with a scalpel and not just blow it up with a sledgehammer. Because this is Ward 5, and I will tell you that 2,000 feet we wouldn't be able to develop in Ward 5. It would really obliterate our entire ward. So we need to figure out what incentive and who's being incentivized. That's what I really am concerned about. Are we incentivizing home builders who already have high building costs right now? I mean, we're talking about affordable housing, and no, do I want them right next to a well? No. But I will tell you that I am okay, and I'm going to be like my daughter. I give her choices A and Z, and she's like, no, I'd like to choose M and N and O. But if we have the study that would, really support something where we can say, hey, during production, we have these levels of VTEX, as well as like gas station, because we know that we have benzene spikes at gas stations as well. Maybe a 300-foot setback that is supported by science and data if those two entities are the same. And then I would like to treat it the same, because I think that that's important. Even California, they put warnings on their cars, actually. They put it on their windows, and they're saying benzene can cause cancer. So they even have it on their gasoline cars. But I do really want to be clear that I do want to protect health and safety. There's no doubt about it. But where does that look like? And then who are we incentivizing, and who are we really adding cost to? Because the cost really should be on oil and gas. Thank you.
Did you have a number on the number 1?
300.
Okay.
What is that? 1A, 3.5.
Okay.
And then I don't mind the current distance for 2, like for the setback, but there's no notice on the plot. I mean, we could add that as well.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lissette?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I did have one more question. Can someone does someone have, I don't know if we have this, but do we have a ballpark figure on what it's actually gonna cost to P&A these existing low producing and shut-in wells overall, if we totaled it up?
Yeah, you were, Mike Foot kind of referenced the 97,000 figure. That's about right. It's about $100,000 for a PNA.
So total we're at, for all of those?
For all of the ones in Brookfield,
Yeah.
for low producers,
Yeah,
marginal producers.
The ones that aren't on the big pads, basically.
Yeah,
How many's on your list, Andrew?
Yeah.
What's their number?
101 of 111?
111?
well, no, those are plugged in abandoned.
Those are the P&A.
Low producers would be, don't quote me, but it would be low millions.
Yeah.
you know,
So how much did we spend on air quality monitoring last year?
2.5 million.
And we're talking about putting in the setbacks so that we can get a developer to P&A these in 10 or 15 years. I think we can find a better solution to do this immediately with bonding and some other financial mechanism that I trust staff to be capable and creative to figure out without passing a 2,000-foot setback that could take years while these things are sitting there, need to be P&A'd immediately. And I think we're really using the wrong tool here to solve this problem. So again, I think we should have this discussion on number one in 6 months, once we see what the COGCC does. Once Mr. Foote thinks about what we can do locally and staff thinks about what we can do locally, I'm hesitant to get in that discussion because I just don't know what it's going to mean. And I also don't want these to sit there for 10 or 15 years. I just want this done tomorrow. I mean, this should be dealt with before a developer comes and becomes their nightmare to deal with. And it's just, I think we can find a more elegant solution. If I had to take a step back, I definitely support 1320, 2000, a higher number on our 4 big well pads that are going to be producing for a long time, that we've had issues with, that we just had an issue with over the weekend. I think we need to update those numbers. But on all these other wells that make that map a big red circle, I think we can come to a faster solution that doesn't involve doing this right now. So I support putting that other part of the conversation on 6 months. I'm good on 2 and 3 all the way down. Seller, I don't know what we're allowed to do, what the state requires. I don't know how all that works for number 3, but however we need to get there, I think we can get there. So yeah, that's my position, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Leslie?
I think there's some great points brought up and a lot of confusion still. I think Councilmember Lindstedt's comments just now resonate a lot with me. I'm going to go backwards. So number 3, yes, I agree there needs to be more extensive information. We were never told about drilling in our area when we bought. Many of our neighbors told us they were never told anything. I think this is a loose end. And then a lot of people are moving in, suddenly finding out that these issues exist, and then suddenly their kids get sick or something. So it's hard to then pick up and go somewhere else. So I think the more we're able to inform people before they make that choice, I think that's important for the health and safety and satisfaction of our residents. So I would certainly support a larger notice area. Again, as to whether it should be up to the seller or the buyer, certainly sellers have other obligations they have to inform buyers about. It's not a new thing. I can't imagine it would be a huge addition to whatever neighborhood the drilling is nearby. If it's at the ranch, for example, or in the Highlands, to say to whoever is buying in that ranch, not whether you're 2,000 feet or 500 feet away, but you are moving into this neighborhood, and this neighborhood has a neighbor that you may want to be, that you need to be aware of. So that would be on that. A couple of questions on number 2. It appears that letter B, C, and D are planned lots, not constructed at this point. And what I heard earlier, it could be 10, 15 years before anything is constructed. So I wouldn't be comfortable exempting those. I would be more likely to want to say, well, you're gonna have to abide by these new regulations, because you haven't built yet. Certainly if it's already constructed, there's not much we can do in that regard. But if it's planned, I know that may be additional cost to the developer, but they may have to come up with another alternative, going up or whatever, in order to reap the original expectations for the project. But I think, again, to the health and safety of our people, I hate to exempt those lots just because they were planned before whatever regulation goes into place. So that, and then number one, again, I agree with what Councilmember Lindsay just said. I'd be in favor of a larger, I mean, you think about 250 feet is not very far. 500 feet is not very far. We're not talking about a big distance here. And if you're a homeowner, and particularly if there's science that says, you know, you could be downwind of something or have disruptions of the easement of activity going on, certainly they should be made aware of that before they buy. But I would like to see a larger setback. But I also agree with what Councilmember Hinkle just said about the science. It would be helpful to have something a bit more definitive about what that science is, just as a guideline for us down the line when we get to the point where we do have to make that final decision. But I'd be in favor of something closer to the 1320, or frankly, I like a standard. I'd like it to be consistent across rather than 5 different levels. That's my answer.
Thank you. Good. Then we go to Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also going to go backwards order. Number 3, I don't think, my feeling is that I don't think there is such a thing as too much notice transparency. So I would definitely be in favor of increasing even beyond 1320, frankly. The one question I have on here is, it says required to notice part of leases for multifamily development. Is there a state preemption that would prevent us from requiring for all residential leases or rental?
Can I get back to you on that?
My point of that is, I guess is, if you're moving into development, you should know what's going on. So to me, it doesn't matter if you're living in an apartment unit with 100 units or just one house, you should know what's going on. So that would be my preference on that one. Number 2, I kind of want to split the middle because I do think that there is a place that we have to let what has already been done and approved go. But like maybe with C, with the site development plan has been approved, that we should do that. But beyond that, I don't know if we really need to. And as far as the setbacks, you know, I'm going to echo what Councilman Boone said. I think on the big well paths that we have now and the extraction, I think that the larger setback is probably necessary. But if there is an issue with where we can get this taken care of a different way, and a much cheaper, much quicker way, then I would be in favor of holding off on that and waiting on that and see where we go with that. But that being said, if I had to pick a number, I like what Councilmember Stout said, the 500-foot setback. As far as 250 is good, as far as what they need access to, and 500 is probably more comfort level. So that's where I can go. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to know what I think? Well, I definitely think that on number 3, we should definitely over communicate, really enhance our informed consent to ensure that people can make that choice and know if they're comfortable, you know, being that close to oil and gas. So all of these are great improvements to the informed consent process. Same with the exemption, but I guess it's kind of hard for me to see where B, C, and D are going to apply, because the only development that I'm thinking of is Baseline that's going to be impacted by producing wells right now, and they have vested rights. So I do really like what Councilmember Lindsay was saying with, you know, see if we can approach this with more of a, let's clean it off. Let's get this cleaned up so that I don't want to preclude development, but I definitely don't want people, to be subjected to a giant crane next to their house. I've seen this in Erie where they're plugging and abandoning wells and the crane is basically on their front porch and it's obscene. So that's where I'm just kind of, how do we know? I definitely know 250 is not enough. Not for the comfort. I would not want that industrial machinery that close to my home. And it could happen. We have a lot of these old pump jacks and horizontal wells, vertical wells that will be plugged and abandoned. So will these homeowners want that next to them while it's happening? Probably not. It seems pretty nightmarish to me, especially since, as we know from this weekend, anything can go wrong with mechanics, even if it's state of the art, things fail, things malfunction. And that's why I'm always going to err on the side of precaution. Because it's either health and safety first or it's not. And health and safety is definitely first. So I hope that gives you some direction.
I'm sorry, Mayor, can I jump in? Not on that question, Councilmember Marsh told us we are not preempted by doing a required lease disclosure for any type of lease, single or multi-family.
Okay.
I think we have good direction.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you everyone for the very thoughtful conversation and comments. And I look forward to hearing more about financial assurances and bonding and making these operators clean up their mess. What other industry is allowed to just leave their industrial garbage behind and never look back and put it on the taxpayers to clean up? None. All right, that's enough from me. We could go on and on. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Staff, take it away.
I was just curious, staff said that there was some direction there. I was just I wasn't keeping track of kind of what everyone was saying, to try to see what the consensus was. Could you kind of go through each of those 1, 2, and 3, and just provide kind of what that consensus was or what direction that you heard, just so that I can.
You bet, Nancy's.
Thank you.
You bet. Nancy's going to use her already established graph to walk us through that.
All right, and team catch me on this because I did make this graph and I'll do what some of our council members did. We'll start from the bottom because that seems a little easier. Jake, can we get those questions back up? Thank you. It seems that everyone was in favor of changing and modifying, expanding the notice requirements. And actually what I heard was irrespective of the setback, we are going to be notifying as many people as possible about what oil and gas facilities are, and then looking at making them sellers. There was a mention of a broker. We do have trouble mandating brokers do things because that's not an industry, but I did hear consensus that it would be a requirement on the seller. So then going up, everybody on multifamily development, although Councilmember Marsh Olson brought up that maybe leases in general, not only multifamily, and I see some heads nodding, so maybe we'll expand that to tenants, a tenant required notice as well. And then a larger area for the notice seems to be consistent. Exemptions, the consensus was yes, the similar exemptions that we have in the other ones. Although there seems to be some debate that might be coming on them. And then this is the stickier one. We have a lot of different numbers. So I heard an absolute from William. This is not the tool right now, so no number. A 2,000, sorry, from Councilmember Lim, 2,000 from Councilmember Lim, and support for that from others. But I actually I don't know if we do have consensus on what number to put in that draft ordinance. Councilmember Anderson's proposal to have a different setback from vertical wells as compared to horizontal wells seemed to have some legs and support among the team. And then also I saw a lot of head nods with maybe some incentives to, if you do air quality monitoring and developer notifications, there could be a lesser setback. But I didn't hear consensus support for that idea, so.
So let me clarify, direction to staff is different than consensus. Direction to staff, I can, when we come back to draft it, although I know Councilmember Leslie would like a kind of an across the board, and of course for staff that would be ideal. We're not going to end up there. Again, from just this conversation, not only from the horizontal wells, not only from those that potentially could be fracked, but really I can see it just in my mind's eye as we direct Andrew and Ms. Burton-Zetti as we move through what the next pieces look like. It's really about the size of the operation. So that will be, I think from a staff perspective, that's where we start. And so again, I think even if we could narrow it down to 3 different variables and then attach the setbacks to those variables. So when we're looking at an industrial size, the 3 pads that we have up there right now, I don't know if that definition then would be if it's more than 10 wells, right? What makes it industrial, other than all of us knowing that those pad sites are certainly industrial. We don't have anything like those pad sites anywhere else. They're all individual. And then the pad sites. So again, kind of talking out loud, we'll have a better sense when we can all regroup, get back together, and flesh out. In my mind's eye, that's what's going to separate it, is the individual wells and then the large pad sites. So if we can have that definition, then it's kind of, it's yay or nay, instead of going back and forth on the number or the feet of the setback. Really, it's based on scope. I don't think realistically that we're going to be able to come back anytime in the next year and have science attached to a level of comfort for council to take science under consideration when developing that setback. Pregnant pause. So we appreciate the clear direction on 2 and 3. 2 is a little iffy with regards to. I think we will clearly define, particularly when we are talking about specifying what planned means. There's different versions of planned, right? There's a concept of what could happen all the way on this side versus vested rights. And then what's in between. So we will clarify those specific developments that Anna listed. There's 6 of them, where they are.
Yeah, that would help.
Sure.
And where they are and where they would fall in that
That's exactly right.
hierarchy. That'd be wonderful.
Okay, terrific.
Example.
That's all I've got. You all are looking at me like I have some other big clarifying, but
This is an easier question, I think. On the notice element in number 3, when we did the reverse setbacks for pre-production and P&A, we deferred the notice for later, didn't we?
I believe we did. Anna, can you?
And so I was a little surprised that we were jumping to the notice here. Was there a reason for that? I mean, I'm fine, but it's different than what we did previously. It's interesting.
Councilmember, in terms of having the discussion along with our discussion this evening, we could have separated it again. I think we added it in since it had been, I think it was included in the August study session. We weren't getting clear direction to really bring that back at a future date. So we included it just in case it was relevant to that conversation this evening.
So do you anticipate when we see the ordinance that you'll bring the notice forward with producing?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other questions? So to be continued?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you all so much for this. It's never quick when you're dealing with the oil and gas topic. So I appreciate your patience, and to our wonderful sustainability crew and the ACES team that's worked so hard. I hope you don't mind if we take a quick 10-minute break. We'll take our recess early because this is going to be kind of a longer conversation. So we'll go ahead and break at 7:30. We'll be back at 7:40. Thank you. And we're back. 7:40. Hi, everyone. Our final item this evening is a discussion on Broomfield's drought zero waste plan. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, and I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's always, it's having worked through the last issue. I think you can feel the tone and the energy in the room changes dramatically. Our acting director of strategic initiatives, Andrew Valdez, certainly is reflecting how he's feeling about sustainability versus oil and gas just by looking at him. Walk us through this plan and the recommendations. A lot of the members of ACES are here tonight, including the chair. They put in a tremendous amount of work. And Ruth and I were just talking, the consultant, Andrew will also introduce her in a moment. Anytime you walk into something from a community perspective and council embraces it as a priority, it's always that perilous journey between what you want to happen into execution. And this group of people has really embraced what that means to walk along this journey. And I'm grateful for all of them, and I'm excited to walk through this plan. Mr. Valdez,
Thank you,
Mr. Sustainability.
So, Mayor and City Council, so for the new members, I wear two very different hats in Broomfield, one oil and gas and one sustainability. I'll let you guys figure out which one I prefer. Anyway, tonight I have the pleasure of speaking to you about the findings from our zero waste planning process, which took place over most of 2021. While there aren't any surprises here, the policy prescriptions in the plan do represent a significant departure from business as usual. And any path that council decides to pursue will have significant impacts both on residents as well as staffing and budget within Broomfield City government. The benefits of zero waste are evident. However, achieving council stated goals on this issue will require some difficult decisions. Fortunately, there is significant momentum at the state, regional levels. So to move the needle here. So as far as leverage of resources and political support go. Broomfield is also not the first community to take a hard look at this. So our peer communities provide case studies and lessons learned on how to, and more importantly, how not to start making progress here. So with that, next slide, Jake, please. All right, so let's start where we've been and where we're going. So in February 2020, this body passed resolution 2020-65, adopting some fairly aggressive diversion goals, which you can see here on the screen. 50% waste diversion by 2025 and 100% or close to 100% diversion by 2035. We adopted zero waste as a guiding principle, and you directed staff to develop a zero waste action plan. Later that year, we applied for and received about $100,000 in funding from the state's Front Range Waste Diversion Grant Program. And we used those funds to hire the nation's foremost zero waste consultant, Abby and Associates, who are with us this evening, to develop a Broomfield specific action plan for zero waste. As I mentioned previously, 2021 was a year of intensive planning. And we spoke to stakeholders, we analyzed waste data and diversion potential, and developed a list of policy plans and infrastructure that would help us achieve our goals. So that brings us to this evening. Tonight, you'll hear details of the policy prescriptions and preliminary analysis of the impacts of these recommendations. We're not making any proposals this evening. What we are seeking from you is input and guidance on these recommendations to guide our next steps and further flesh out the impacts of any direction the council would like to pursue. Over summer of last year, we did have a robust public engagement stakeholder process as part of the development of the zero waste plan. Broadly speaking, we heard enthusiastic support for this initiative, but until policy proposals really reach this level, you only kind of hear from the folks who support what you're talking about anyway. So Any one or series of recommendations in the plan would be subject to public coordination and budgetary processes before implementation can take place. I will share one brief cautionary tale from our friends in Nevada who passed the universal collection ordinance without proper diligence, and that resulted in 2 recall efforts and a tremendous burden on staff managing complaints. Almost as much as oil and gas. And our first milestone year is 2025, where we would have to improve our diversion by 22% to achieve. So with regard to organics and hard to recycle materials, Broomfield is pretty fortunate to have a lot of this infrastructure in our backyard. But as you'll see later in the presentation, it gets harder the closer you get to 100%. Next slide, please. So let's define zero waste. This is the internationally recognized definition. Conservation of all resources by means of responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials without burning and with no discharges to land, water, or air that threaten the environment or human health. Sounds easy, right? Well, so the graphic on the screen here shows the interventions and behavior that actually have the highest impact. And perhaps surprisingly, the redesign, reduce, and reuse actually do have the greatest leverage. Then we get into recovery and materials management, compost and organics, and recycling. And then finally, whatever is left over, that's the last bit that's very hard to keep out of the landfill. And let's just hit some of the known benefits very briefly. So streamlined routes can lead to downward pressure on fees and expansion of services. We are talking single hauler here. This is obvious if you think about it, but more efficient routes allow for economies of scale. What we have right now in Broomfield is essentially a market failure with multiple providers servicing one neighborhood or even the same street. And this leads to sort of a hodgepodge of bilateral contracts, service contracts, and doesn't allow for any one hauler to build a cost-effective organics route. So this is why we don't have curbside pickup for organics. Organics diversion leads to GHG reductions. So for every ton of municipal solid waste that is diverted, we get about an equivalent benefit in greenhouse gas reductions. And this mainly comes from diversion of organics and methane that these put off as they decompose. Less burden on infrastructure. Trash trucks are heavy, and the more heavy traffic you have on your streets, the more wear and tear on your roads. And of course, it's also kind of annoying to have a bunch of noisy trucks up and down your street every day of the week, right? And then finally, circular economy leads to reuse of valuable materials. Recovery of raw materials can put money directly back into the local economy. And while it may add a fraction of a percent to construction costs by mandating taking roll-off dumpsters to sorting facilities, the value of those raw materials being repurposed is significant. And we have done some analysis here. So that's the high-level overview. And now I'll hand off the presentation to, I believe, Camille is up next.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Camille Pollan. I am Broomfield's first ever Community Sustainability Manager. I'm really excited to be in this role at this particular moment in time. We have this fantastic opportunity to, as Andrew was mentioning, leverage the existing momentum at the state, local, and federal level to advance sustainability in Broomfield. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So the first thing that we need to think about when we're talking about zero waste is that we can't manage what we don't measure, right? So we started off with a measurement. At the beginning of the planning process, we documented the baseline diversion and disposal rates. And I just want to clarify, when we're talking about diversion, that means that waste diverted from the landfill. So what's not going into the landfill, what's going into either recycling or the circular economy or otherwise disposed of. So when we looked at this data in 2018, we estimated our diversion rate to be 12%. And so it's not great, but it was at least a starting point so we can look at the data. And beginning in 2020, Broomfield required all licensed haulers to report tons of diversion and disposal by generator type. So what this did is it allowed us more access to data And when we looked at it, we actually found out that we have a 28% diversion rate. So we're actually doing better than we thought. So that means that essentially we're already 16 more percentage points towards our goal. And so if you look at the next slide, you can see that that takes us to from 2018 to 2020. And where we're going is 2025, which is to achieve 50% of our goal. And then 2035 is where we would like to achieve zero waste or pretty close to zero waste. And that's the goal that we set up while we were looking at how to develop the strategies to get us there, what kinds of policies and programs would help Broomfield, and our configuration of commercial and residential properties get to that goal. Next slide, please. So here's where we measure up. When you take that 28%, it's not terrible. We're kind of in the middle when you look at where we compare to Colorado as a whole and Denver. Obviously, some of the leaders in our state are pretty good. We know that Broomfield has some, Boulder has some very aggressive policies. So this kind of gives us a benchmark of where we want to go and some aspirational tools for looking at our neighbors and regional partners. We definitely don't want to be the first, and we don't want to be the last. So this gives us the opportunity to dig deeply on our policies and programs to find the most effective. Next, please. As Andrew said, we already spent a lot of time last year doing stakeholder engagement. So we went out and talked to the community. We had surveys, we had focus groups, we had workshops, we tabled at community fairs, we had social media outreach and flyers, newsletters. And so we really sought to engage with the community and hear about what they wanted to see in a zero waste plan and their thoughts about some of our draft proposals. And so in these workshops, we had the chance to do some dot voting on some proposals. And if you look at the next slide, you can see some of the responses that we got. And this is really what, directly from your constituents, this is what they're telling us. They're saying right now it's a brain drain to try to figure out what goes in the recycling bin, and that they would like to see more recycling opportunities for hard to recycle items. And you know, my apartment complex does not recycle, and I find that shocking. I'd like to see additional education on how we can recycle materials when we're remodeling. I liked having composting in Boulder, etc. So a lot of these things are bubbling up from the community, and we're hearing this. And also just on the ROI, right? They're saying the ROI is my grandchildren's quality of life, right? And a lot of our residents are definitely concerned about climate change. So what I wanted to do at the moment is introduce our next speaker, who is Aaron Hume. He is the chair of ACES, the Advisory Committee on Environmental Sustainability, and he's going to take us to the next portion.
Thanks, Camille. And I'd also like to thank Mayor Castriota, the City Manager's Office, and the rest of Council for having us tonight. My name is Aaron Hune. I'm in my day job, I'm the Managing Director of Crestview Energy. I've had the privilege of serving on ACES since its inception. The first term as Vice Chair and this current term as Chair. Well, I spend most of my effort on ACES on the Energy Subcommittee and the greenhouse gas goals. I've been paying particular attention to what's going on in the Zero Waste Subcommittee as this plan has been drafted. And I know any of the council members who've attended our meetings know that we occasionally have some pretty spirited debates about a number of topics within the ACES purview. And while this plan was very well vetted and discussed at length, there wasn't a lot of debate because it has completely unanimous support of every member of ACES. That doesn't always happen. And I think that's a testament to the hard work of the Zero Waste Subcommittee, to staff, city manager's office, and Abby and Associates who helped us draft this. So I think this is an excellent plan. It has the unanimous endorsement of the full committee, and I think it's a really important step, both in terms of the zero waste goals, as well as in terms of the greenhouse gas goals as well. I want to thank two of my fellow committee members who are in attendance, Vice Chair Brianna Hallinan and the Chair of Zero Waste, which is Taylor Ryman. And Taylor is going to be coming up because she can tell you a lot more about what the plan entails. So thank you all very much.
Good evening, Council. Thanks, Aaron, for that great introduction. My name is Taylor Ryman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the chair of the Zero Waste Subcommittee for ACES. In my day job, I'm actually the City Council Administrator for the City of Boulder, so I have a lot of experience working with big personalities and attending these really great and riveting council meetings late into the evening. So I'm going to walk through the priority 6 recommendations that we really have tried to bubble up to the top in this plan. If you don't mind going to the next slide, please, Jake. Thanks. So if you read the plan in full, you'll notice that it has 14 initiatives in total. And all of these initiatives are going to be important to reach our goals. But realizing that the city can't take on all 14 at once, we've decided to prioritize 6 in particular that can get us a substantial way on reaching our goals. So what you see here is this graphic, which is supposed to kind of depict all of the 6 strategies and how they work together. I'm going to get into explaining what each component of this graphic is a little bit in later slides, but just to overview, that bottom bar right there is our diversion altogether, and so our current diversion is 28%. That's in the dark blue there. The next section is, so we've categorized the 6 initiatives into a couple different buckets, and that's what you're seeing in the orange section. We're calling this section our education and stewardship section, and it includes the Lead by Example initiative, the Technical Assistance initiative, and the Outreach and Education initiative. And these are all ways that we can be good partners to the community in moving these initiatives along. And again, I'll explain a little bit more later. The second section in that green are what we're calling structural changes. So these are the things like the construction and demolition ordinance, the community recycling and composting ordinance, and then universal collection. So these are really big ticket items taken together, these 6. They have the potential to increase our diversion by 41%, bringing us to a whole 69% diversion whenever they're complete. And the remaining 9 initiatives that aren't going to be detailed here are estimated to bring us another about 9% closer to our 100% goal. So in the next few slides, I'm going to describe a little bit about each initiative and how they work. And then I'm going to start actually with the community recycling and composting ordinance, as well as universal collection. These two have a really unique relationship. And so if you go on to the next slide, please. So as Andrew described a little bit, right now, we're in a kind of a hodgepodge of a situation, to use his words, with about 7 different haulers servicing the city. And each of these haulers differs on their collection schedules, what they offer to pick up. And since there's no arrangement on which haulers serve which residents, garbage trucks are just kind of flying down the streets, sometimes multiple in a day. So not all residents have convenient options to recycle and compost, and the lack of coordination among haulers results in the higher impacts that Andrew was talking about, the street impacts, the emissions from the trucks, the noise pollution. Neighbors don't like to hear all that. So we believe that taken together, a community ordinance for recycling and composting and the universal collection approach could solve this problem. So for the ordinance, the option would require making trash, recycling, and composting available to everyone, sorting their waste at the bin, and then implementing pay-as-you-throw incentives. So pay-as-you-throw is essentially kind of how it sounds like. If you throw away more, you pay more. If you throw away less, you pay less. And under this program, it may be possible for some businesses and residents to even decrease the cost of their service if they decrease their generation.
On the other hand, universal collection, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Universal collection would streamline more efficient routes. And one option would be a single hauler contract, where the city would use a competitive bid process to select one hauler for the entire city, which would make for a much simpler licensing system than the one that is currently managed. Alternatively, the city could be divided up into multiple districts, and contracts could be negotiated or awarded for each district. So the ordinance essentially ensures that community members can participate in diversion by way of having recycling and compost available to them, whereas universal collection really ensures that the collection services, so picking up that diversion from their home, is held to the same standard across the city and coordinated thoughtfully. So working together, these two initiatives can really create collection and trash services that design waste out of their system and get to that sort of redesigned top of the pyramid we were talking about earlier. Next slide, please. So next up is construction and demolition debris, which makes up about 24% of what goes to the landfill. We talked a lot about building in Broomfield. It's not slowing down, and I don't know if we want it to. So with the high rates of construction into the future, it's prudent to be implementing policies to divert those materials for recycling and reuse. This initiative would adopt requirements, programs, and incentives to increase deconstruction instead of demolition. So to take apart a building instead of knocking it all down and actually be able to use those items. Building material reuse and diversion of recyclable and compostable C&D debris. In other cities, this program is operated alongside the permitting process, and diversion requirements would apply to projects of a certain type or that meet a minimum square footage. In addition to improving our systems, we also need to be good stewards of this work. And this is where education and stewardship initiatives come in on the next slide. Thanks. So first is lead by example, where the city would ensure that its own municipal operations are increasing diversion rates. And we hope that by using the city as an organization to demonstrate zero waste behaviors, we could provide a model for residents and businesses in the adoption of new policies and programs. Next slide. Outreach and education is incredibly important for all sectors. We'll need to support residents and businesses on the new systems and how to properly sort their waste. And this information and awareness-based outreach and education will be crucial for the community in understanding and complying with new zero waste behaviors. Next slide. Finally, technical assistance would help fill in any necessary technical gaps as we move the plan forward. Assistance would be directed towards multifamily building owners and residents, commercial institutions, industrial and construction sectors, and could include things like presentations, on-site assessment, and educational materials. So that actually summarizes the 6 priority recommendations. And regardless of the timeline and order of these initiatives, it's important that we involve the public and create opportunities for people from all walks of life to benefit in participating in a circular economy. I really want to give special thanks to Ruth and Associates. They poured hours into this draft plan. I really appreciate that. Staff have obviously been the backbone of everything, helping wrangle all of our spirited debates and reminding us of what the process is and how to best leverage it. Special thanks goes to my colleagues at ACES. I'm constantly humbled because I'm not the smartest person in the room often. And so I really just appreciate all of the camaraderie in bringing this all together. And then of course, want to thank council. Your direction and your decision to prioritize these things has made this work possible. And so I really appreciate your goal setting and the creation of ACES. And on the last feel good note, I will say, it is noble to endeavor towards a world without waste, made harder because I think most people don't think twice when they throw trash away. But away is a real place and trash is a real resource. And I continue to be inspired by people who can reframe that value and make use of it. Thank you.
God, I feel like clapping. That was awesome.
We could do that.
Thank you so much. Next slide, Jake. I think this is out of order. So this is the greenhouse gas reduction potential if we achieve our zero waste goals. And these are some equivalents that we'll put together. So 46,000 acres of trees, 4,500 homes, or 8,264 passenger miles. So, you know, waste diversion is more than just keeping stuff out of the landfills with proper stewardship of land. Next slide. So this, I'm not going to go through this super dense slide here right now, but what I wanted council to take away from this is we have done some preliminary analysis on what the impacts are going to be on staffing, budget, and resources. This is all also included in the plan. And as you can see, again, you know, single hauler number 9 clocking in 10-year total pretty high. So these are significant structural changes. We want to hear from council, we want to hear from the community, and we also want to make sure that whatever direction we go, this is also sustainable from a budgetary perspective, from a staffing perspective. So with that, we've got our brain trust here to answer questions, feedback, and get direction as we go forward. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. All right, well, let's get to our council questions and comments. And thank you all, that was stellar. I'm so excited. Who wants to go first? Councilmember Marshall.
First. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm new on council, but this is a conversation that I've been hearing about for a long time, and the work of your committee. While I was, out talking to neighbors the last year, climate change and sustainability was probably one of the number one things that I heard about, and specifically the single hauler trash. So I think I'm really happy to see that coming forward. I just want to say I have a couple of questions, specifically about the single hauler trash, actually part of it. In the cost analysis, and I know this would affect the amount, but did you look at, rather than doing a single hauler, did you look at the cost of what a municipal service would cost? I mean, obviously the upfront cost would be much higher, but, and would there be is there any like comparable?
Yeah, so like how what Denver has.
Yeah.
We did not look at that, but Ruth, correct me if I'm wrong, would be much more expensive.
Did you talk about like, I mean, did something you for at all as far as what they, not just upfront cost, but the ongoing cost would be?
We really didn't look at it.
Okay.
It's, yeah, sure. And then there's a reason why we didn't.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Ruth Abbey with Abbey Associates. It's been a pleasure to work with your team, ACES, and your staff. Are really amazing. You're so lucky to have them. Of course, they're lucky to have you. I wanted to answer the question with regards to municipal hauling. We're asked to look at that a lot. And the problem is economies of scale. So our regional haulers, we have both smaller haulers, but most of our haulers that operate in Broomfield operate across the region. And so they have the material recovery facilities, they have the transfer stations, they have the relationships with the third party material recovery, marketing, brokering, et cetera. So when you're starting up a new service from scratch, you have to have, the marketing manager, you have to duplicate all that effort. And so we frequently look at this. We oftentimes, if we already have municipal contracts, like for example, if you already are a municipal hauler, you can always be more effective, cost effective than the private sector, because guess what? You don't have to have profit. So there is that advantage in municipal hauling because the facts on the ground are the same. It's the same trucks, the same labor requirements, et cetera. But the big difference between, a standalone municipal function and and contracting with a hauler that's a regional level, regional scale, has the resources, is that economies of scale issue. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does, but actually, follow up on that question. Is there any opportunity maybe to partner with other jurisdictions in Arvada, although other ones to do, whether it's single hauler or whether it's municipal, to do a collaborative approach to this issue?
We do oftentimes see communities band together for regional cooperation, and we are seeing that emerge in the Front Range. So FORWARD, which stands for Front Range Waste Diversion Program. Sorry not to get all the acronyms straight. are really trying to get all the municipalities, the 90 or so municipalities in the region to really focus on the future in terms of recycling, waste prevention, composting. And so one of the things that we do see in other regions of the country is that particularly smaller towns can band together and procure services together, can fund municipally owned infrastructure like new processing facilities, transfer stations, MRFs, et cetera. And the reason that's cost effective is because you're banding together. So there is that potential opportunity in the future. What we found in this area is we already do have that infrastructure. We have really significant composting organics infrastructure. We have existing large scale processing facilities. And so we just don't see that gap right now that needed to be filled by a municipal approach. But there is always the opportunity to work cooperatively regionally on things like, collection systems. And so even bigger than the single hauler for a number of communities would be even more economies of scale. So there is that opportunity as well.
Thank you. Question on the pricing of the trash that you're talking about. What would that be based on? Would it be based on the size of the can or would it weight?
Yeah, so that's the component of pay as you throw. And you actually only pay, you get recycle and compost for free. And then you get your charge on the size of garbage cart that you get. So I think we actually have some data on this. Do you want to go to the last slide in the presentation? I don't know if we can pull that up. We did a little bit unscientific survey here, but we did talk to some peer communities, and the ones that are doing recycling and compost for a 32-gallon trash cart, they're paying that $11.50 a month. So again, that downward price pressure thing is real. The larger cart you get, obviously, the more you pay.
Now, a couple other questions and I'm focusing on trash in a moment, but did you look at issues such as electric EV garbage trucks versus what we now, you mentioned the fact that you have, in my neighborhood, we have 7 different trash companies all doing whatever down the street every week, but I know some communities are moving towards purchasing electric vehicles. Is that something that you've looked at all?
The technology is there. So we are seeing some communities require their collectors to invest in those trucks. They do exist, they do work, and they can be efficient to all electric garbage trucks. So we are seeing that particularly in communities with high greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. That would be something to consider. That could be a part of a contract to say over time, as you implement this program, we would like you to transition to dedicated trucks for Broomfield that are all electric. And that's a reasonable thing to ask in a contract because they will be making an investment anyway. Because even though they have the regional capacity for some things, if you're asking a collector to dedicate routes to Broomfield, they will have to either reassign transportation resources, collection resources, or they would have to invest in new trucks. And so it might be a good time to say, we want the best trucks and the least polluting trucks. So it's a possibility to include in the contract as well.
And then final question on the trash. One of my concerns, and this is maybe a different discussion for today, but is as far as the wages paid to the employees of those companies, and then make sure that they are livable wages. I'm assuming we can do something like that in our contract, but is that something you all looked at as far as the cost? I know one thing that will happen with the community is if we go to a single hauler, the question is going to be what is cheaper for them versus what we have now. And if we add that hiring to that, what do you see that implementing or affecting that?
Keep popping up. So the answer is yes, it does impact the cost. So if you think about what the services are that are being provided, about 60 to 80% of the service is the actual person and vehicle coming to your house every week, right? Very little bit, 20% or 30% is the cost of the landfilling, right? So there are some fixed costs in there, but we really do see a lot of communities that elect to do either a prevailing wage or a no, no dispute bargaining situation and encourage that among the collectors. We haven't costed that out for Broomfield because it's really contextual and it depends on the region. That's why we just sort of did a smattering of different examples of rates in other nearby communities. But that would be something we could definitely look into.
Thank you all for all of this. I mean, looking through this made for really interesting reading and it took me a while to get through it all. But I don't think there's anything in this plan that I don't agree with, at least conceptually. One thing I'm just going to note that like the charm facility that Boulder has, they're especially during the pandemic. I don't know how much styrofoam and plastic bags that I piled in my garage until I got around to going out to the charm facility to get rid of them. And having something like that in Broomfield to facilitate that would be definitely beneficial, I think. So that's all I have there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Leslie.
Thank you, Mayor. I just really want to congratulate the council for taking this initiative on. Coming from back east, this kind of program has been in place for many, many years. In fact, the politicians used to go to the landfill where the neighbors had to come in and distribute all of their different parts into different buckets and things like that. So the politicians knew that every neighbor was going to be at the landfill at some point each month to distribute their stuff up. Just think how much time we could save in running for elected office. If we could go to one place to have that happen. I say that lightly, but it's something that I have been surprised not to have seen that same kind of approach in other parts of the country, not just here in Colorado, but other parts. So I want to compliment the council on doing this. Second, I want to compliment the team. Did a great presentation. A way is a place. I have never heard that before. That really struck me. We always say we're going to just throw it away, and we never think about where that away place is located, other than it goes into a pail somewhere and then goes off beyond our ken, and we don't know what happens to it. I thought that was brilliant, so I want to compliment you on that. That gave me some real insight into this thing. During my campaign, there were a number of people that spoke about the single hauler issue. They're tired of multiple trucks coming up and down the street. The roads have had to be repaved. In fact, one neighbor pointed out his road, which had recently been repaved, but was ready to be repaved again because of all the haulers going in. So whether we do it municipally or whether we do it in some fashion, whether it's one single carrier or multiples, whether we do it by ward or some other, to give some incentive to the private sector to meet our needs is something to be determined. But I think there'll be a lot of people happy knowing that our tax rates are going to be benefited by not having to repay streets all the time because of all these heavy trucks going through. And I think there are a lot of other benefits that we didn't get into tonight about the cost offsets that this kind of program will provide. And then finally, I just want to say, tying this in with alternative energy strategies, et cetera. And I know the county is working on those things, but that's going to give a holistic benefit to every resident, reducing our costs, reducing our taxes, benefiting our economy, benefiting our climate. And I think those are the things that obviously has motivated this council and this administration to go in this direction. So obviously I'm very keen on this. I want to help wherever I can. I didn't see anything in the plan that concerned me. Obviously things need to be further hashed out, but now I know that a way is a place. And so I'm feeling very powerful tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor. Hard to follow up after Councilmember Leslie. This is terrific. I'm really excited to see this plan, and I support everything in it. I think the single hauler piece. I have a sneaking suspicion after what happened in Arvada and what happened in this very room not that long ago. It may end up on the ballot with the fee, but I think we'll have to think about that down the road. I know in wards 2 and 3, we have a lot of non-HOA neighborhoods that are going to have a lot of concerns about that. But I think the community overwhelmingly will support it, and I think we need that buy-in. So
I would be pretty open to putting, the single hauler aspect of it on the ballot with that cleanup fee, piece that needs to go to the ballot anyways. In terms of the deconstruction piece, do we know which municipalities around us have a requirement when someone's tearing down or deconstructing a building? I haven't heard of that, so which of our neighboring communities are actually doing that? And I'd just like to learn more about it.
So the initiative that Taylor described is sort of a whole suite of construction and demolition debris management.
Yep.
Deconstruction being a piece of that.
Okay.
It is not common across the country. The city of Portland, Oregon initiated it about 5 years ago. And the reason is because, and this might not be as relevant to Broomfield as in other areas, but they were seeing a lot of, smaller homes being destroyed and mega mansions being built in their place.
Yep.
And so there was a lot of really good, high quality building material there that they wanted to address. So as we talk into communities across the country, some who, buildings in Oregon were built, with real sized, lumber, that 2x4 is actually 2x4. So it may not be as relevant in some areas. You would have to make that judgment whether it be appropriate in Broomfield. But in terms of the requirements or the incentives, it doesn't necessarily have to be a mandate. It could be an incentive, or it can be an encouragement. Another community that I'm aware of in Palo Alto in California, they merely ask that if you are going to demolish a building, you have a deconstruction contractor go through and evaluate it. And there are contractors in the region who do this work and could be able to give you an assessment of what tax benefit you would get by deconstructing your building or home. And that would be the requirement of the municipality to say, hey, check it out first before you demolish, rather than any kind of mandate as they do in Portland.
I was curious, we don't have that many, actually, on one of the few historic homes in town, but we don't have that many older homes made of the, old brick and old, slow growth timber and that type of stuff. So I was just curious if you had neighboring communities that were doing something similar. I think it's a great idea. I just worry about the practicality of it. I don't want that to be a barrier to someone tearing down an unsafe structure, or I just think we need to be flexible. Would be my only feedback on that. I think we need to be really thoughtful about how that affects us, especially just because we don't have that much deconstruction going on anyways. So I think that's an interesting part of it. Back to Councilmember Marsh-Holshin's point about the bidding process for a single hauler. Maybe legal to help, but I since I've been on this council, we've never really brought it up, but I've always wanted to just look at our procurement and bidding processes to maybe go in the direction we do with marijuana licensing, where we have merit-based or best value metrics in place to make sure whoever we're contracting with or procuring goods from pays their employees well, has benefits, has a matched 401k, whatever those are. But is that something we could consider if we pass, or if the voters passed a single hauler requirement? Could we do a bidding, something like that, where we take those into account?
I'm gonna look to Pat Gilbert, who's been working on this issue, to see if we've actually looked into that. I want to say, yes, we can regulate industries like that, but I know trash hauling was a big part of this plan.
And we've done some, Pat Gilbert, Deputy City County Attorney, we've done some work with respect to our procurement policies and best value. I think we need to take a look at that and see how that factors in. Intellectually, I think we could do that and add that to our factors. I just have to work through the mechanics of what that would look like.
I just don't want us to get in a position where we're bidding out, haulers, and we're getting to the lowest cost hauler who might not treat their employees the best and, might not have the best business practices. So I want that to be top of mind as this moves forward, that we're taking into account all aspects of it. But I support the plan. I think it's a tremendous piece of work. I'm really excited to see it move forward. And yeah, let's get the the fee on the ballot, and let's have some discussions with the public about the various parts of this proposal. But I think it's terrific. I'm really excited about it, and I just want to thank you all for the work. I did not expect when I read the packet this week something so comprehensive in such a short amount of time. It really is tremendous work. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing this move forward. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim?
I wanted to follow up with staff on Councilmember Lindsted's question. Knowing how much work and having at least some insight in being the council representative on ACES, knowing how much the ACES committee has embraced the single hauler universal collection initiative as core to the zero waste plan. Could you give us a framework for when if this were to go on the ballot, this single hauler, what's the best case scenario here? I mean, is it possible? You know, how soon? I mean, it has to come before council. So if as a result of adopting this plan, if the specifics came before council, then council could look at it. But then what would be the best case time frame then if we chose to put it on the ballot?
I'll let Nancy do the time frame piece, and then I'll do it from staff's perspective, what that looks like.
Why don't you do that time piece and we'll figure out the time. I'll do the time piece while you figure out the other part.
Okay. So I know that, so we have 5 haulers that do residential right now in Brookfield. We have, and so we have residential, there's 5 of them. We have commercial, and then we have roll-off. I've been in communication with Arvada. What worked, what didn't work, would they do it again? Looking over at Councilmember Lindstedt. So again, it's a lift. And it's not just a lift for the residents. So again, as we flush this out, we'll come back with the, I would say it's a 2-year process. Just from a outreach engagement aside, Councilmember Lim, from the bids. Again, it's a full year of this is the direction that we're going in. Here's what it looks like, and here's all of those caveats. I would say that council will, it's not a 2-part, let's put it on the agenda. There's probably 5 meetings for council. And the reason I keep looking at Councilmember Lindstedt is because he's familiar with what occurred in Arvada, and again, what they would do differently, and what they'd walk back, quite frankly. So I'd say a thoughtful process from a time frame outside of the election is about 2 years.
Practically, we'd have to get the ballot question to the voters on the up or down, single or not. And then after that point, if the question went in the affirmative, then it would take staff the normal amount of time. Actually, we'd probably start preparing it before that date. And then we get to council, so we're looking at usually the 2-month for getting it on council calendars. So I would say end of first quarter 2023. We could look at implementation. But then that's just on the ordinance side of it. Then I do think there's a lot of staffing, regulatory, who's going to watch this, where does this live? And to Councilmember Lindstedt's point of what we just went through with marijuana licensing, what's going to happen when we do put this out for bid, and that could slow down the actual truck on the ground single hauler moving forward.
Thank you. That was my question for staff. And for the ACES group, and this might be based on previous stakeholder involvement, and I understand you reached out and made a tremendous effort to do that in many sectors. There was a resident question about how the deconstruction aspect of the proposal would go forward to make sure that all of the developers would be totally involved in this process. So could you sketch out a little bit how you see that going forward?
Hi, thank you, Councilmember Lim. So we've worked with a number of communities to develop construction and demolition debris recycling requirements. As we explained, the deconstruction is a little bit more of a rare thing that we see. But in terms of the construction and demolition debris, we really think that that is something that is regional in scope. And your neighbors, Fort Collins and Boulder, both have pursued construction and demolition debris requirements of their builders. The whole Front Range really needs to be working on this to have that level playing field among developers, right? We don't want folks not to build in Broomfield because it's too hard, if this is a burden to them. We want it to be normalized across the Front Range. And so cooperating and strategizing with other communities to kind of levelize a regulation that's sort of uniform or more or less uniform across the region would be very desirable. And when we worked with builders, we were going to be working on a construction and demolition debris recycling requirement in a community, we would absolutely be meeting with the building community. And what we've done in other communities, and they've told us this, is that, look, just give us a level playing field, just give us the rules. We were surprised to find when we surveyed the haulers, the roll-off haulers in Broomfield, none of them were really providing any recycling debris management. They all have that service. In fact, Western has just built a new aspect to their transfer station to process more construction debris. They all provide that service, but none of the builders were asking for it. So we really do need a new rule, some sort of regulation, either an incentive, you get head of the line privileges at the permit desk would be one, right? So there could be incentives, or there could just be requirements. A standard operating procedure in Broomfield is that we recycle construction debris. The services are available and that's just going to be a standard. But I think that we would definitely recommend that regional dialogue and of absolutely engagement with the building community to say what's reasonable from your point of view, what's cost effective, and what can we do? Because this is as Taylor pointed out, a huge chunk of what's going to landfill now.
Thank you. That overview was helpful. And I would just say from my perspective, I've been impressed with staff's connections with the regional level and making those efforts to pull the resources together when it is an economy of scale and it needs a regional approach and a level playing field. I think that's we've got the foundation from what I understand to move that forward. So thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Jezierski.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, to start with Andrew, between oil and gas and environmental sustainability, it's very clear that your enthusiasm lies with oil and gas. Kidding. And then Aaron, I gotta say that your hair has officially reached the rock god status. But more seriously, two enthusiastic thumbs up on what I've heard tonight. I always love what's coming out of our ACES group, and I fully support what I heard tonight. As Councilmember Linston mentioned, single hauler trash. I'm in favor of it, but it's definitely going to be a controversial issue, here in Broomfield as it was in the past, and it has been in other communities. So makes sense to me. Just the other day we had a trash hauler that's had an accident or something, spilled all kinds of stuff all over the street. So anything that we can do, in my mind, to limit the number of haulers that go down my street each day, I think it's a positive. And if we could do it less expensive than what it currently is, just an added bonus. So I support it. I do think it needs to go to the ballots. The only question I have was when you're talking about timeline, I was confused. Are we talking about, can we get it on the ballot this year, or is it looking 2 years to get it on the ballot?
We get it on the ballot this year,
Sure.
as long as we have the question ready by August. And that would just be the yes or no question and then work on the ordinance.
Okay, so, okay, that's what I thought. I was just a little confused when I was hearing like 2 years or 3 years. I get that was for implementation as soon as it passed. But I would guess that to get on the ballot, that should be a fairly simple process. Just to get the language down, we approve it, and then throw it out there in November.
Can I quote you with the word simple?
Relatively
The
simple.
process, you're right.
Yeah, but that's what I meant the process, right? The debate on it, I think it's a whole other issue, but that's a great reason to put it on the ballots, that does allow the debate, eventually will allow the community to decide whether or not, that's where they want to go as a whole. So support it, hope it passes, but I think it's appropriate to throw that on the ballot this November. I hope we can do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of clarifying questions. One just on the last issue. Is it mandated by election or is that a choice? I think our data didn't, right?
That is a choice.
It was a referendum.
I'm reading actually, Councilmember Cohen, I'm going to send you all this article from the Denver Post that talks about Lakewood, Arvada, and Westminster. It is a choice.
So it's simply a referendum, they're not required. I'm just clarifying.
It is, and Arvada, so there is Arvada's imposed a mandatory $5 a month minimum service fee, and non-payment resulted in a lien being placed on the homeowner's property if they opted out.
Like a covenant. Okay.
Because I mean, otherwise, if you don't have criteria that's built in, again, that's where it gets process simple, yes. Outcome implementation, not so much.
Also, I wanted to ask in terms of, you mentioned earlier, economies of scale would make it possible, I think, to afford recycling for everybody. Was there analysis, I'm just curious as to what the average person in Brookfield pays now? And are we, as your analysis, that we would do this to expand recycling and other composting, that we would anticipate people would continue to pay roughly the same? Or do you expect different neighborhoods will see spikes or drops?
I can take us down with this one. So, hi again. We did another informal, very not scientific survey of just some people who were willing to share what they pay and what their services include. This is really just a handful of respondents that we get, but because there's so many different haulers in the city and because each person elects for different, is it trash, is it recycling, is it biweekly, is it weekly? It's really hard to get that information, but the range ended up being something like $6.50 to $18. And that $6.50 that person's been paying for decades. So it might have been like a legacy rate, but it was really hard to nail that down. But through pay as you throw, as we mentioned, people could potentially, through good behavior, have the opportunity to reduce their cost for service.
I want the $6 you said a month. Way below what I'm paying. Is there no way, since we license these haulers, to find this data of what the average household is paying? We know how many people are recycling, right?
So I'll look to staff for that. I think the intention was to try to get better data around the question that you're asking. Am I right to say that? Okay. So that was our intention as we move into the next phase of responding to your feedback and really solidifying this plan.
Because I think people all have good intentions and love the idea, but when it comes down to brass tacks, does it cost more? And I think if we go to an election in November, we're going to have that answer roughly. And if you're quoting me $6 a month, mine has to go down. I can't imagine it would go up. But I think there's a huge range, obviously. And I'm curious, how do you calculate that? And I don't know what difficulties there are with HOAs that have their own do we just cancel that? Do we over supersede that, or is there a process where that works itself through?
So that's all part of the fund implementation pieces.
Our law would supersede that. They wouldn't be properly licensed to operate in Broomfield.
And so again, a lot of the Lakewood, for the size that they are, the number of HOAs is not large amount. The number of HOAs in Broomfield, that's a whole different level of conversation, along with the equity issue of any type. Anytime you mandate or you charge for an opt-out, that's another bigger part of this conversation. And although with the 5 trash haulers, from a licensing perspective, Councilmember Cohen, doesn't include other than the general guidelines of how much per can. So again, kind of drilling down those amounts, we wouldn't get that from the haulers on a, I mean, again, we could say the median. And then again, broken down by size of trash can based on the volumes that the cans hold.
And from their experience, your thought is we'd be able to give people a general idea. This is what the price turned out to be in Lakewood or similar sized communities.
I'm sorry, anecdotally, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all for this conversation, and I'm so proud of what USIS has done. Our staff and our volunteers are, lack of better words, freaking amazing. Thank you. And Taylor, you were spot on with your letter to us, just saying and talking about the fires, And so when people talk about cost, the cost of not doing something like this is going to be even worse. So I applaud all of your efforts and your words to us in making sure this happens. My daughter's calling me right now, and it's interesting because she is all about climate. She tells me all the time, what are we doing about climate change? And so we're doing this not only for us, but for our future generations, and we're establishing that for future Broomfielders. I will echo what other council members have been repeating about single hauler trash and recycling, and so many people have asked for composting. We compost at home, and we send it off to scraps and those sorts of things. And I would love to have some sort of, set place where everyone can do composting. I think that would be wonderful. I just had a question just about the policy part of this, just talking about the product policy. Sometimes there's also controversy about, enacting a fee or, on the sale of certain disposable items, such as disposable plastic, paper shopping bags, to incentivize customer reuse. What does that look like in other cities and counties? Can someone speak to that? And then what are those fees used for? Because my concern with that is saying, yes, you can go to the grocery store, but then we're also charging people who are low income, more fees. And so what would those fees be used for? Would we be using some sort of community outreach to give reusable bags to those who are low income? What does that look like? How are these fees being used in other counties? I would really like to know.
Yeah, I'll pop up again to address that question. So Colorado recently repealed its preemption of bans and fees on certain products, allowing the municipalities to go ahead and make their own regulation. We also think there might be state legislation on things like bags or single-use plastics or other things. That might be something that is taken care of by the state. But this product policy discussion initiative in the zero waste plan was really to kind of incorporate all of the potential different types of product policies you could undertake, whether that could be a bag fee or a plastic bag ban or a cup charge or any of a number of those things. That we think that is something that would resonate and would be successful in helping folks do that top of the hierarchy of redesign reuse. In other communities, and we've seen it on a statewide level in a number of different states, it can be done on the community level or it can be done on a statewide level. In terms of the low income, there's often an exception if you have, a free and reduced, a EBT card or something like that, you get your, you don't get charged. That would be an example. Some communities have done that. With regards to how it would be implemented, we've oftentimes seen just an outright ban on some types of materials like single-use plastic bags, and then maybe a fee for paper, encouraging folks to provide their own. And then, my goodness, how many of us have closets full of reusable bags? We do. I mean, we do see a lot of giveaways. So a lot of communities have invested in providing at birthday and at celebrations and city council, Broomfield bags, giving out bags. So we've seen that as well. We are seeing an emerging interest in single-use plastics for foodware, coffee cups and other things. The pandemic has kind of reduced enthusiasm about bring your own coffee cup, but that is something that we do see a lot of work in across the country and a lot of interest in, because it's the single-use plastics is such a visceral example of what we're wasting, right? We don't necessarily need to do that. So there are really a number of different policy frameworks you can look at. You can look at outright bans, you can look at incentives, you can look at fees. They would always be vetted through a public process, working with retailers, working with grocery stores, making sure that it would not be a negative impact. I think that it's a dialogue, it's something to discuss. Are we ready for this? It's kind of we put it kind of a little bit lower on the priority list just because it's not a huge amount of tons. It's just very symbolic of the kind of wasting that we're currently doing when we are using those kind of products. So does that answer your question?
It does. I have a follow-up question in a minute, but it is important, I think, to educate all, populations. And I think that's our end game, is to prevent, these bags from being used. And I think oftentimes we don't have enough education in that regard as well. So I think part of those fees can be used for education and also outreach and providing the bags for those who are low income. Were those fees like in other states or even locally, were they put on the ballot?
We've really not seen that too much, although in the state of California, they did have a referendum on their bag ban that was passed with the legislature. So a bill was passed, and then there was a referendum, and that was defeated, so the law went into effect. But typically, we have not seen that be at the municipal level to put that on the ballot. And it's just because, in moving forward on any kind of legislation, these kinds of initiatives, we really recommend a stakeholder-driven process so that it does eventually get to that consensus. The building community for construction debris, the retailer community for some sort of product initiative, just making sure that we're ready for this. And we've seen, chambers of commerce, districts, business districts stand up and say, we're ready for this. We're ready to convert. It's not that big of a deal and we can do this. So we have seen that across the country where, there is that consensus. So it's not necessarily needing to go all the way to the ballot. We feel like we can go ahead and take that risk.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of, like Kroger, I'm sure they're ready. They've done it in other places. So, same with Safeway and those sorts of things. So I think that's about it for now, but I really do support this. I feel like if we don't take advantage of doing something that is bold, we risk a lot more. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you for this great presentation, and my questions are quickly dwindling here. So on the, I was gonna ask about the HOAs, so that has been a kind of we talk a lot about the area, the neighborhoods that don't yet have the single hauler, but then we have the HOAs, and I just want to make a note about the amplifying of the HOAs, not just because it's happened in my community. Our neighbors are like, we need every week recycling, and it was an absolute no from our hauler. So there's an advantage coming to these HOAs, more of a statement than a question, but to get that recycling every single week and adding on the composting, like that would be, I think it would be well embraced. And I'm seeing because we have every other week recycling and a lot of recycling happening, I'll see people putting their cardboard into their garbage can because of because it's not recycling that week and it's already full, and that is really, really frustrating. And they won't take anything outside the garbage, outside the recycling can. So I think that will be embraced by the HOAs. But it'll be interesting how that conversation goes forward. I did want to note that I have a constituent who works with the restaurants, and he is so enthusiastic about composting in the restaurants, and so I'm glad to see that that could become a reality where that food is composted. And the really main question I have that wasn't addressed was, and this might be too complex, is what impact could upcoming state legislation have on waste diversion? Like we had last year's legislation to phase out single-use plastic bags, styrofoam, and would anything foreseeable at the state that they would do to somehow limit some of these hard to recycle items and anything else? Would we see any noticeable impact in state legislation that we can foresee on our plan here that would be significant? That would be for a future discussion.
Why don't, yeah, we can add that unless Taylor has something, but in addition to that, I know that Camille can speak to, because we have Excel and United Power that are also under reducing the greenhouse gases, and part of the conversation with sustainability staff is, what is it that they are doing that then we can capitalize? Again, the standalone, the single trash hauler, but from a low hanging fruit perspective, what education could we put in place now? I don't have my glasses on, but I'm sure it was probably Andrew or Camille that put my picture of the recycling in there. That's smart. I got a half a dozen emails, calls, and text messages that maybe the city manager needs to be working more closely with ACES, because I had stuff in that recycle bin that should have been in that recycle bin. So people are paying attention. Camille, can you speak a little bit to how we are capitalizing? Again, we're working in partnership. They've come and done presentations, and again, what package that is for that percentage of impact and decrease that then impacts our local efforts as well.
Yeah, thank you for introducing that topic. And really, I didn't talk earlier this evening to you at all about the greenhouse gas reduction plan, but you'll be expecting another study session from us and the ACES team in April to talk about our other sustainability strategies. And when I mentioned the community outreach that we did last summer, we combined the zero waste topics with the other GHG topics, that is to say transportation and energy, as one community conversation. And so we'll be bringing those other pieces to you in April. And we really are crafting these policies as kind of a comprehensive sustainability effort. And zero waste came to you separately because it is kind of its own beast, as you see here. But within the context of the greenhouse gas reduction plan, as you've heard, we are doing a lot of coordination with Excel and with United Power. And through their decarbonization efforts, in other words, through the fact that they also have clean energy goals and they're going towards more renewables, that's actually going to help us advance close to 60% towards our goals. And so that's a huge lift for us, and it's a benefit to our community that we happen to be in those territories and customers of those utilities that are taking that so seriously. And so, when we think about that plan and we think about this plan, we are also able to leverage existing resources and, that we don't have to do necessarily the heavy lifting of creating our own municipal hauling system if those infrastructures exist already in the in the region. So we are looking at those things through ACES and through our analyses and our data crunching and talking with the regional partners, as well as with Colorado Communities for Climate Action, CC4CA, a lot of collaboration as we look at, where can we leverage existing opportunities and where can we learn from best practices that are right here on the Front Range.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one clarification question for staff, and that is, I know we're going to place if we decide to do this, place the single hauler use on the ballot. It could be placed on there. In regards to what they're calling the clean community fee, I noticed in there it said something about placing that on the ballot as well. Is that required, or are we just doing that kind of in the same manner why we're doing the single hauler on the ballot?
Ward, let me clarify. So the opt-out fee, is that the question?
No, it
That's
says
also
in
on the
here
ballot?
it's a clean community fee. Linked to landfill collection service to help fund expanded diversion efforts, including reuse and recycling grants.
Ms. Camille, how's your answer?
Yes, none of these are requirements, right? All of these are recommendations. And so all of these taken together will help us achieve our goals, but we will be presenting and crafting each of these individually. So, we are recommending that is something that we look at in order to fund future sustainability activities. But it is, the plan won't necessarily fall apart if we don't do that. But as you see, these are each individual measures that stack on top of one another, help us achieve our goals. But just want to reiterate that we are going to be coming to council with individual proposals for each of these.
Okay, let me just kind of rephrase that question. Does that fee have to go on the ballot? Or are we just doing that because we're trying to be cautious in the same manner we're being cautious with the single hauler use?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is going to be in regards to what is the state's timeline for phasing out those single-use plastics and styrofoams that we passed last session? I am not familiar with what ended up in that bill.
Councilmember Ward, so what they did was they removed the plastics preemption. So that allowed local municipalities to pass their own bans. So they didn't go quite as far as I think we all would have liked at the state level. So now local jurisdictions, I know Louisville just did it, a few other pure communities have done this, is the bag fee now. And that's allowed now for the state legislature and the Constitution.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councilmember Ward, I have an email to your previous council from July of last year that I can resend to this council that talks about those restrictions in that time.
That'd be great, thanks. My next question is in regards to the recycling. It was mentioned in this presentation, and I have also experienced this living in multiple apartment complexes within Broomfield. What can and cannot be recycled varies depending on who your provider is and where you're living. Is the goal of this plan and any of the ordinances you bring forward to council to kind of standardize this? Or if let's say we do go single hauler, but we decide to do 5 different contracts for, let's just say each one for simplicity's sake. Is each ward going to have different requirements because you have the different companies, or are we going to try and standardize that across the board?
Yeah, I think the goal would be as much standardization as possible with rates, with what can be thrown away, and then the haulers or hauler gets the opportunity to build those economies of scale. That's really where the value is in the single hauler districting scheme. just for the council's consideration, Broomfield is not huge. So if we did discuss, certain splitting up the jurisdiction, we wouldn't recommend doing any more than 2. And anyone could bid for one or both, and we would, request highest and best offers with our, requirements, whether they be, living wage or standardization of, weekly or biweekly service, whatever it is, it would be built into the contract and functional requirements of the contract.
All right, thank you. My next question is going to be, will we need to do any further adjustments to code or whatever to get businesses using recyclable and compostable like plates, silverware, etc.? Or is that part of the philosophy and idea behind this plan that they will move towards that as an incentive? Because obviously you are trying to incentivize less stuff being thrown out, more stuff being recycled and composted, which is going to put pressure on residents because they hopefully want to decrease what they're paying. And that means businesses have to transition from what they're providing with styrofoam plates and cups and et cetera, or would we have to kind of mandate that through code?
I don't know that it would be something that would be addressed through like a building code or like a zoning code or anything like that. I think it would just be through our
resolution or whatever other methods we have of imposing change on.
Well, through our licensing, so Broomfield manages all the licenses for the haulers to operate in city and county limits. So that would be kind of our stick.
Well, let me rephrase that question. So let's say you have, let's just take any random business. Let's take McDonald's just for example, because why not? They obviously, like, if you get to go food for to go and you get your standard meal with a drink and whatnot, you have a paper bag and you have a cup like this. It's not easily recyclable. Does this plan ideally make them want to transition to more sustainable products, or is that something we as council have to address through resolutions or changes in code or whatever tactics we have?
Yeah, so I think pay as you throw sort of gets at that.
Okay.
The less stuff that you put in the landfill bin, the better. So that's your kind of incentive to just have fewer things that need to go in that bin, and less, large receptacle. And yeah.
So to answer your question in a kind of direct way, yes, it could make people want to transition to those sort of either reusable or compostable or recyclable products. A couple of the initiatives that we didn't elevate tonight are like the product policies that was raised by Councilmember Hinkle. We didn't really want to start off with high priority recommendations of things like that, because we want to be able to start off with ways of redesigning structural changes that need to be changed and trying to help the community along. So that's why we are really leaning on the technical assistance, outreach, and education, and we're trying to stay away from the slaps on the wrist. But of course, the plan in full is what we're recommending we take in eventually. And so things like product policies would help that. Also, there's a business recognition program aspect. And so, going to the other point on what's coming down the pipe from the state. There are some ways that working at the state level make more sense with product policies, for example, and I know of one coming to the legislature on extended producer responsibilities, but I'm not tracking the session enough to know if that's been introduced. In other ways, though, business recognition program is great at the local level because it allows us to develop our relationship with our businesses and other customers, and there could be elements of that business recognition program that would award. It's kind of a point system, and you get the recognition and you get to paste on your window or whatever, that we could outline switching to compostables as being an element of that. So there's certainly different places to leverage the plan that we could encourage those transitions.
Okay, thank you.
And my final question, for now at least, I understand the 100% diversion goal is by 2035, and I know that was set by previous councils. Is there any way that goal can be pushed forward? I'm sorry, not forward. What I mean is pushed up earlier. Can we meet that 100% diversion before 2035?
I'll take a stab at that. So one of the barriers to getting to 100% is that we have what we like to term legacy materials in our trash, right? We have things that really can't be recycled or composted or reduced. Styrofoam is a good example. We can reduce that, but things like painted wood or asbestos or, we have about 20% other in our category when Broomfield did have the University of Colorado Denver do a composition study. There's just a category of stuff that is nearly not able to be addressed through these policies. So that 100% or darn close is really aspirational. And I think that in talking to Camille, we do need those aspirational goals, because if we can say we can only get to 50%, we're going to fall short. We can say we're going to get as high as we can towards that 100%, we're going to get as close as we can. But moving that forward would be probably difficult and probably costly, because it would front load a lot of things that we really think are going to take a longer time in order to do the stakeholder outreach and the education and technical assistance. It really needs to unfold over several years. And so it is a 10-year plan or, plus to get to those higher diversion rates. And technology will change, materials will change, but we still think there are going to be some things that are better off in the landfill. And so we probably won't get to that 100% super soon. But we can do a lot, as Taylor pointed out. We get really far along the way with these 6 big initiatives, and then these other ones are kind of icing on the cake, getting us closer and closer. We can always do more, but I think that the plan that ACES and staff kind of laid out and the trajectory could really get us on the map, and it will 100% make us a leader in the Front Range. So that's pretty good.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is kind of a personal issue for me. As about 4 years ago, my son, who just happens to be celebrating his birthday this month, happy birthday to him, he stood in front of council and talked about composting and recycling. It was a very proud dad moment for me. This was unprompted. He said that he wanted to talk in front of council and came up with what he wanted to talk about. He talked about composting and recycling. So, but not only is it a very personal thing for me, but it's also very personal to our community. And I think that you have all heard this in the ACES committee, that a lot of people do care about this issue. I would say that I hear about trash, recycling, composting more than just about any other issue. This is something that people want to see improved here in Broomfield, and we need the next steps in order to get there. The timeline in order to kind of get that, it seems like that single hauler trash or the district trash option is kind of that that one that has a lot of potential to really reduce, to increase the diversion rate, reduce the amount that's going into our landfill. So, but looking at that timeline for implementation, that's one of those where, I think for a lot of people in the community, they would like to see that happen a little bit sooner. We've talked about the idea before about is there some type of requirement that we can put on our haulers to at least offer recycling option? There's folks in Broomfield that do not have a recycling option because of their trash hauler. And then also, of course, there's a lot of people that would like to do composting, but a curbside composting isn't an option. So can we at least require our trash haulers to offer some type of option for recycling and composting as a part of that licensing process? So that's something that we can get going a lot sooner, so that people at least have access to that now.
I want to say just quickly that all of our residential haulers offer recycling.
Are you sure?
Mhm.
Because I heard something different.
Yep, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
All of them that are currently licensed.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw. What, do we have some hauler out there that's not licensed? Well, that's an issue.
I will find out more, but this person said that it's a new startup, they have one truck, and they're going around trying to get clients at a dirt cheap price, and they don't offer recycling.
So yeah, so that would probably be good for us to know.
Okay,
Thanks.
I'll go back to my source.
I wanted to kind of go back to what Taylor was describing with the community recycling ordinance, which is basically the rules. And then the single hauler or districting, which is essentially the program. So you have rules and then you have program. The rules, which would require recycling and composting collection, is really to be that underpinning of the program. And it's to address the portions of the community that are not really well serviced by route-based collection. So route-based collection is really for single family, for duplexes, for even up to fourplexes, anybody that has a cart, right, has individual service. When you're in a multifamily complex, or if you're in a commercial building, you know, you have a dumpster, right? And so that's really not as part of a collection route. You know, you sporadically go all over the community, picking up here, based on need. So that's why this single hauler districting concept is really for that route-based service, and that the requirement, the community recycling ordinance, is for everybody else, including the business sector, including the multifamily large complexes. The reason that you wouldn't require haulers to do something now, particularly if you're going to go for a ballot initiative to do single hauler, is because you're asking for an investment that then in a couple of years they no longer are able to provide. So if you're going to require them to do something like composting, they would have to invest in the truck and the capacity and everything else. And then, you know, 2 years later, they may be out of that service. So it's really kind of an either or. You can either require your haulers to do something and have it be quote unquote open market like we have here. That's what the facts on the ground in Boulder and in Fort Collins. They essentially have one predominant player in both of those towns, Western in Boulder and Gallegos and now Republic in Fort Collins. And so they don't have quite the strain that we would have, because we really do have 5 players that are dominant. Each have us, you know, their customers scattered throughout Broomfield. And so even though it will take longer to do a very thoughtful job of the stakeholder engagement and the ballot potential and new ordinances and other things, we are really recommending that, you know, the council make the decision for these big items that are going to take time and effort to just go ahead and start that process. The things that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, what we can do in the meantime, lead by example, right? We can have, you know, really great recycling, composting, waste prevention, other things in as many municipal buildings as we can. We can train our staff, we can do outreach, we can do education, we can do some other things, because we really do still have in Broomfield the ability to recycle and compost through the outlets that we have voluntarily. It's just not as convenient, right? You can go to the Broomfield recycling center, or you can, you know, subscribe to one of the compost collectors and pay an extra fee. So it's not as convenient as it will be when it's universal. But maybe not everybody in Broomfield knows of those options. And so, you know, elevating and celebrating those options would be another thing that we can do in the immediate short term, which would also create demand for, oh, I get it, I would like to be able to do this. Maybe we need something universal across the city. So we would probably not recommend making new requirements on your haulers just because you would be asking them to make an investment that they may not end up getting to use. And then with the last thing about composting is we really got the feedback. We surveyed all of the haulers in Broomfield, and we really got the feedback that it just is not cost effective for them to provide that service when they have these really dispersed routes. They have, what Holler told us, they can only service 4 households per day per truck, 400 households per day per truck. And the standard for efficiency is 800. So if you have a compact route, you can see that it's, it's twice the efficiency as these spread out routes where they're hopscotching across town, which is why they can't cost effectively provide compost under the present situation. Hopefully that addresses your issue.
That was great. Thank you for all that information. Yeah, I really do appreciate that. Gives me some perspective on that in terms of what we do now and what we do later. So looking at that district hauler trash service, and you had mentioned that only doing 2 districts. Would we exempt our HOAs from that process, or would they be considered part of those districts as well?
So all the feedback we got from peer communities was do not exempt the HOAs. What I think could be kind of a middle path would be, HOAs have contracts with service providers. They may be 1 to 5 year contracts or something like that. What we could do if we went down this path is say, hey, if you have an existing contract, that contract will go towards expiry, and then you'd be part of the city regime. So we don't have to, force anybody into breaking the contract.
Excellent, thanks. So looking at the operating compost facilities at parks and open spaces, it just seems like that there may be a source for a higher volume composting, recycling cans at parks and open spaces. Seems like there is a sufficient supply there. And then just looking at one of those options that we can kind of lead by example was with the compost. Can we offer the compost pickup for park rentals? Per se, so that it's one of those that we can at least offer that as a service that's in addition to our park service rentals, but it's not necessarily something that because it is an area in which there's potentially going to be compostable materials, either cups, and as well as food. And so by offering that as a service to park rentals, we can help kind of lead that by example, and they can take advantage of that.
Yeah, so like when people rent out like a gazebo or something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's something that we could probably, we need to talk through logistics with open space. I think they manage that program. I mean, again, low hanging fruit. I mean, the easiest thing would be, oh, and here's an add-on. And we already partner with Western, who provides the service municipally for events. They do compost for our like Greenfield days and events like that, zero waste. So I mean, it would be fairly straightforward. Maybe we would try and figure out how to feed it or something. But
all right, well, that's all I have. Thanks, man.
That's great. All right, so everybody's gone their first round. Before I go to second round, I just, I want to definitely echo my colleagues with the appreciation of all of the work that's gone into this. I know it's been a couple of years in the making for many of our original ACES members, and I know the wheels of government turn painfully slow. To give you an example, housing. 4 years ago, we had our Housing Advisory Committee come and give us their recommendations, and we've adopted them all, but the last one, it took 4 years to get that housing authority finally appointed and in place, because we have people that want to put skin in the game. We're ready to be bold. We're not going to kick it down the road. And I think this is where we are with sustainability. We're ready to put our money where our mouth is and actually take some bold action. I do want to know more about the Arvada process, though, like what they did wrong, so we don't make those same mistakes. Did they do the same amount of community engagement that our committee has done?
They did they didn't go to ballot. And I think by going to ballot that that will greatly reduce the opportunity for people to weigh in, right? And so again, it's like anything else where If you don't vote, you don't get a complaint. So if you didn't weigh in on it, you had the opportunity. So I think that's a significant, that's a significant difference. And if Broomfield Council, has learned many things, but one of which on something that is that significant and that impactful, having the voters weigh in on it, that is the direction to go. Other lessons learned has to do with the HOAs.
Do tell.
Again, it's managing the expectations on the front end, right? That it's not, it isn't one of those, the loudest, most predominantly organized HOA isn't going to dictate for the rest of CCOB, right? So there's a difference between outreach and engagement and decision-making. So again, the decision-making rests with the majority decision at the voters box. So again, and there's, Golden did it in talk about trendsetters. They've had single trash haulers since 2010. So there's plenty of lessons, not only with the decision to do it and the implementation, but also what would they change with regards to when you're 5 years in. So there's a lot of folks that are around us that we can learn from. And Abby had indicated, bold and getting out front. This is one of those that we don't necessarily have to be bold and get out front, because there's a lot of folks that have gotten out front before us. So we can learn from that. And we do. So again, it's a perilous path, but one that we do it intentionally and thoughtfully and strategically. You all you're going to get as many knocks as you get pats on the back.
That's fair. I mean, what would you say 50% of our community is under HOA or covenant? Is that like just a rough estimate? Half?
Say, probably, yeah, close if not just a little bit.
So half of our community, this is a very sensitive issue because they're dealing with the multiple trucks. They're dealing with, the hazards that it creates. Yet, like 6 of us, at least on council, are in HOA, so it's just never really occurred to me. But I do have a recycling queue in my garage because I can't fit all my recycling either. I prioritize it, like what needs to go first. And there's always a waiting pile of cardboard or something that, has to wait till the next 2 weeks. So I feel you there.
And we'll see more and more of that as we have seen in this community, as other communities have. We're now in the era of deliver to my house. Right? And all of that cardboard and packaging material and the plastic bubble, which used to be so fun and probably still fun for the kids. But there's a lot of it, right?
Yeah. Well, here's a fun PSA, thanks to my colleague, Councilmember Schaaf. The Sherwin-Williams on Sheridan offers free paint recycling. You can just go in there and drop it off, they'll take it all. So it's something close and local. I didn't know that, and I appreciate knowing that now. Good as what?
Yeah.
Jax does too, PSA for them. All right, so that's all I have. Thanks again. Let's do it. Sounds like there's a lot of support for possibly making this a ballot question, and I think I agree that that's a good way to let people have a voice, and then when it's done, it's done. Councilmember Marshall.
A couple follow-up questions and a comment actually about the ballot thing. Question for the committee. With the plastic bags specifically, the other communities that have started enacting ordinances, what are they doing with the rise of, as Manager Hoffman said, the delivery? I know before pandemic, my wife and I would do our grocery shopping, and we'd have our canvas bags, and we even bought the mesh produce bags. But now we get now largely we pick up orders from the store, and oftentimes you get a box of pasta in one plastic bag, and, you know, it's really infuriating and frustrating. So what are other communities doing to deal with that issue? What can we do, I guess, differently?
So, you know, there's any number of things that communities interact with into commerce, and you do see some ordinances that go beyond just the containers that are at the stores, and they advance to the actual packaging. So I know one community that restricts styrofoam be delivered even in a box coming from a manufacturer. I'm not sure how they implement that or they enforce that, but that is on their books, and they don't want that. I know of an initiative, activist organization that is really working on Amazon boxes. Can you just come and pick them up again? You're coming to my house every day anyway. Can't you just pick them up? Haven't quite reached the level of policy, but I think everything is on the table. I think that what really needs to be understood is where is the action, who has the authority, and where you can intervene. And I think that some of those things that are coming from outside of Broomfield, things are mailed in. When you're going to the grocery store, pick things up, where's that intervention and point, and where can you practically make the difference to encourage that reuse? So I haven't quite heard the example that you gave of reuse when you go to pick up at the grocery store, but anything's possible. So Broomfield can be first.
Thank you. So going off of what a couple other people have said, that increase in cardboard and increase delivery. I also have cardboard boxes that pile up for weeks, and then I take them to the recycling center. But as Councilmember Anderson mentioned, having weekly recycling pickup would go huge to deal with that. I do have a couple of questions about for staff on the single hauler, I guess. First of all, are we required, does that mean that we're required by state law to allow an opt-out of the single hauler? I saw that in the memo.
Yes.
Okay, does that require us to license a hauler to service those people, or do we have to, that's a question.
No, I mean, again, anybody that operates in the city and county has to be licensed. So if you opt out, have that individual that wants to opt out, how they would then go about getting a hauler to their home, only their home, would still have to be licensed here.
Yeah, if I may, isn't it true that we don't require trash pickup?
We do not require trash pickup. And I probably should not say this, because we all know that everything we say, but over the holidays, we just had so many boxes, the half of the garage after like 6 months, because we didn't break them down, and you have to break them down in order to put them. And now that people are watching what I throw away, well, we're just hyper conscientious, even when I put it out on because everybody knows where the city manager lives for Crofton Park. I was at Costco and I happened to mention it, and so we've been taking every single box that we have over to the Costco, and they welcome them. So now I'm going to hear about this tomorrow, but that's what we've been doing with our boxes.
I guess my thought was to incentivize, if we do a single hauler, to incentivize people not to opt out. If we don't license somebody to then service them, then the majority of people would then not probably opt out, I'm guessing.
I was going to offer that, the communities that do have those opt-out provisions, it's really for the self-haul, because they're not, you don't require to have service. You can opt out and do self-haul instead. That's what people would be opting out to do. So you don't necessarily have to provide them with the whole suite of hauler options that are going to undermine your program of the universal. but they can under state law. You
Just
don't
like-
have, you don't require them.
Out of curiosity, where do people take trash to softball? I know when I lived in Northern Virginia, there was, the dump was
Burn
free,
it.
and you could just take it, dump it, anything you want. But is there, where do they take softball here?
We don't have a lot of close options, right? The landfill's 40 miles away. You can go to the transfer station in Boulder. I bet there's not a lot of softball, people taking advantage of that here.
So my question on the ballot measure, and coming off what Councilmember Staff said, is it faster to get this done without going to ballot?
Just because you can do it, doesn't mean you should do it. Yes.
Okay. I guess here's my thought, and I may be the minority on this position.
Okay.
But during the campaign, I was outspoken on this issue, and I was pretty upfront with people I talked to, and I talked to a lot of people about this particular issue. I guess to me, the voters elected us to represent them, knowing our positions. So whichever way we go, I think that we need robust engagement. We need to talk to people. We need town halls. We need community meetings. We need to get people engaged. But I'm not convinced that going to the ballot is the only right answer, I guess is my position on that. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, well, again, thank you, Sustainability Department and our wonderful ACES team and our ancillary staff and everybody who helped produce this wonderful presentation. And it looks like we have a path forward, so go fight win. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. There being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Good night.